I will call to order the June 8, 2020 regular business meeting of the Billings City Council. Welcome, everyone. Hope you had a good weekend. If you would, please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance, and then remain standing for the invocation. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And I will deliver our invocation tonight. Lord, we present this meeting and our city before you tonight with our humble request that you'd help guide the City Council, our community, and our country during what we confess are unusually difficult times. We continue to remember and lift up those individuals, families, and businesses in our community that have been severely impacted by the coronavirus, but also express our appreciation for the way in which Montana, unlike many other states, has been spared from the full brunt of this terrible disease. We continue to pray for your grace and direction as we do our best to deal with the disease and restore our economy as we go forward. We also pray for our citizens who are Black, Hispanic, Native, or other persons of color who are hurting tonight, now as a result of the death of George Floyd and others, and pray that you would help us all to learn empathy as we strive to see the world through the eyes of others who are different from ourselves. Similarly, we pray for our police officers who may feel underappreciated or unfairly tarred by the wrongdoing of others. And we express our thanks for the peacefulness of the rally this weekend, and for the prudence of the protesters and the professionalism of our police force. Finally, as individuals, we pray for humility so that we may look first to change ourselves before we try to change others, and for love so that we can care more for the well-being of others than the well-being of ourselves. Amen. Tony, would you call the roll, please?
Councilmember Shaw.
Here.
Yakowicz.
Present.
Neese.
Here.
Ewald.
Here.
Joy.
Present.
Tariki.
Here.
Harrington.
Present.
Ronning.
Here.
Boyette.
Here.
Brown.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The first item up is approval of our minutes from the May 11th, 2020 meeting. Are there any questions or changes or motion pertaining to the May 11 minutes? Councilmember Yakowicz.
Yes, Your Honor, Council, make a motion to approve.
Is there a second? Councilmember Brown. Thank you very much. Any discussion on the motion? The motion is for approval of the May 11 minutes. All in favor, please signify by raising a hand. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. We'll move into council courtesies, and here I'll just start us off by making a few comments that I wrote down concerning recent events. You know, this is a unique time, and in recent months, we've given a lot of appropriate attention to the coronavirus and our very real budget deficit. But it's also important that we continue to recognize the significance of the death of George Floyd and the depth of the hurt and distrust that exists among many persons of color in our country and in our city. I couldn't attend our meeting last Monday, so I'd like to thank Deputy Mayor Yakowicz for reading a statement from me on this subject last week. Thank you very much. Thank you for also the support of all the council and the search for my brother, which was successful. I'd also like to acknowledge the importance of the rally that took place yesterday afternoon on the courthouse lawn and 2nd Avenue, and thank everyone who worked hard to keep the rally productive and peaceful. In particular, the organizers and hundreds of protesters made sure that their passion never got out of hand, and their message was clearly communicated. Chief St. John and our police force worked closely with the organizers and were there to make sure that everyone stayed safe. They were extremely professional, and their presence was appropriately understated. Thank you, Councilmember Ronnie, because I know that you played a role in connecting our organizers with the chief. Thank you. And even the handful of counter protesters and the gentleman with assault rifles and at least one samurai sword, which I found to be both comical at the same time, but also a little unnecessarily intimidating. But for the most part, everyone behaved themselves just fine, and we are appreciative for that. In all ways, I was very proud of our community and thank our community. But of course, protest slogans are not solutions. So I'm sure that the rally and these recent events will not be the end, but probably just the beginning of a long-term dialogue on race and proper policing in our country and in our city. As I expressed during the press conference held on Thursday, it's my personal hope, not speaking on behalf of the council, but personally, that in the future we focus on at least 3 items relevant to these issues. One, what we can do to provide more resources for mental health and drug prevention and treatment, especially for meth addiction, so that crime can be prevented before it occurs and the police can spend less time dealing with the consequences of these social ills. Second, I'd like to see more attention on how we can increase the number of minority members on our police force, especially Native Americans, which is now very difficult because the hiring standards that we have are very high, and the experienced officers are often hired away by federal agencies that can pay more. And lastly, and third, I think we need to put pressure on our local legislators to better fund the Division of Criminal Investigation in the State Department of Justice, so that they have the resources to do an immediate and independent investigation when there is a complaint of serious police misconduct. That doesn't always happen now because the state division is so underfunded. So I look forward to having a discussion with our legislators about remedying that situation in the future. Thank you again for everybody who's involved with events this weekend. With that, we'll open it up for other council courtesies before we move on to the city administrator's report. Are there any other council courtesies? Seeing none, we'll turn it over to our city administrator, Chris Kukulski. Chris, do you have anything?
Mine will be brief. Mayor and council, we do not have any ex parte communication. And similar, Mayor, just want to thank council members who were in communication with us last week, helped us get in contact with and work in collaboration with the organizers yesterday. I suspect, though certainly don't know, but suspect that there were some extremely strong differences of opinion amongst the variety of folks, as my daughters and I were downtown, and yet people were peaceful and they rallied and they supported one another. And to that, I was very proud of our community and of Chief St. John and the work of our department in conjunction with the variety of folks who were there. So with that, I want to give the chief, if he'd like to say anything, but I just thank you for you guys' support as we work through this, and I thank the chief for his work.
Chief?
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate. Sorry, Mayor, your permission?
Please, please.
Thank you. Well, you covered a lot of things that I would touch on. I think what I really want to stress is that the reason why this thing went off so well is because of the relationships that we have built with our community and our partners in law enforcement. Things like what happened on Sunday don't happen if you're trying to make a relationship a week out. And so our continuing conversations, our relationships with our community members specifically certainly help facilitate that. And I'd also, on the law enforcement side, same thing. When you can make a phone call and have local, state, and federal people here to help you in all aspects of what it was we were trying to do. We wanted to take a very modest and reserved approach to it. All incidents and dust-ups that took place were handled by bike officers with no other resources deployed. Just an outstanding job. I'd like to take full credit but I did nothing. We have some very, very talented police officers on this department, and they did just an outstanding job. And credit to the organizers. They also marshaled their troops pretty well and kept them in line. Cooler heads prevailed when there was some differences of opinion. It's the way protests should be, and I'll hold Billings up as an example anywhere, anytime, on all aspects. So very happy. Couldn't be more pleased and more proud of Billings and the department in particular, how things turned out on Sunday. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief. And on behalf of, I'm sure, the whole community and the council, please extend our appreciation to everybody in your department who worked on the events over the weekend. I apologize to the council. I skipped over proclamations on our agenda, which we do not have any of, but we might have some council reports if there are any from Councilmember Joy.
Thank you. On Tuesday, the Community Development Board had their monthly meeting. During the meeting, one of the big items on the agenda that they have been working on is how best to spend the appropriations they've been given through the CARES Act. The HUD has not yet sent a lot of guidance as to how those funds are to be used. And so the board is continuing to wait and look at guidance that's been given. They're also looking at other communities and how they've been spending the appropriations from the CARE Act. At this time, they haven't yet made a decision on how they will spend those funds. Thank you.
Thank you for that report. Any other council reports? Seeing none, we've had our administrator report, so we'll move into public comment on non-public hearing items. Write down this number if you're a member of the public and you would like to comment. The phone number to call is in Montana, 237-6196. That's the number to call on items that do not have a public hearing. And tonight that will be any item under number 1, which is our consent agenda, and number 4, which is the eBird TIF award. The other 2 items, number 2 and number 3, you'll have a public hearing and you can comment later. But items 1 or 4, call that number if you'd like to be heard. You'll have 3 minutes. We'll need your name and ask you to turn off your television. That number again, 237-6196. Copies of the council's agenda are available on the city website. If you just search for council agenda. That number again, 237-6196. Tony, do we have anyone calling in?
We do not.
Okay. If in the next few seconds you hear something, let us know and we'll come back to this item. But for now, we will close public comment on non-public hearing items 1 and 4 and move into number 1, our consent agenda. And first ask the council if there's any items they would like to separate for a separate vote from number 1. Are there any separations? Councilmember Brown?
I have no separations, but I do need to abstain from item 1K1.
And I have a note probably on number 2. I think there was also some Morrison payments on that one, 1K2.
I didn't see any, but there might be. There were a lot of them in there. So, I mean, I will certainly abstain from that on the assumption that there may be. I didn't see any in there though.
Yeah, I'm double checking here, and I do see some. So Councilman Brown will abstain from those 2 and any other council separations. Councilmember Neese.
I'll be separating item J for a separate vote.
1J resolution temporarily suspend zoning regulations for outdoor patio and seating areas. Okay. Any other separations? Seeing none, Councilmember Yakovich.
Your Honor and Council, I make a motion to approve all items except 1J and 1K, 1 and 2.
Thank you very much. Is there a second? Councilmember Ronning seconds the motion. Discussion on the motion or on any of these items? Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. On 1.5B, or no, just 1B, I guess, the Met Transit Electronic Fare Collection. So is there somebody that can answer the questions, or?
Do we have somebody from, I see Rusty Logan.
Yep, I'm here.
Chris Kukulski, with your permission, we'll put this question to Rusty.
Okay, so with this new system you're putting in place, is that going to be the only way to ride the bus?
Well, what the system is, it's a pretty comprehensive fare package that we're looking at. So it'll allow for smartphone use, smart card use, where individuals could purchase their pass, much like it'll look like a gift card or a credit card that they can reload. But we'll still continue to have cash fare boxes on the bus as well. So individuals that don't have access to a PC or choose not to buy a monthly pass can still definitely use cash to purchase the pass. And we'll still have options available for purchasing a pass here at the Met and the various locations that we partner with.
Okay, that's what I was wondering, because
Okay.
a lot of the people who ride the bus are low income and they probably don't have all the electronics that it takes to ride the bus with the new system.
Absolutely. And yeah, the new system that we're looking at does allow for the continued use of paper passes as well. So we're leaving that wide open as far as individuals, just giving them more options.
Thank you, Rusty.
Thank you very much. Any other questions or discussion on the motion? Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe this would be for Dave Mumford, but several people call in every so often to me and say, well, why don't we put a street light at this corner, a street light at that corner? Do you have like a ballpark figure that is typically what a street light at an intersection costs, or is it dependent on the intersection? Just some general information.
Excuse me, Councilmember Boyd, are you talking about a street light or a traffic signal?
Well, a street light, green, red, and yellow.
A traffic signal.
Okay.
A signal is usually around 250 to 300,000. Sometimes less if we don't have to do, but if you have to put a completely new one, it's probably in that ballpark.
Okay, thank you.
And they have to meet a federal standard for when they're warranted. There's a set of warrants, and we're required by state statute to follow the federal guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Other questions or discussion on the motion? Seeing none, we'll proceed to a vote on the motion on the non-separated items, which is all the items except for 1J and 1K. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously. Bring us then to our first separated item, 1J, resolution on the outdoor patio and seating areas. Council Member Neese, this was your separation. Would you like to start us?
Yeah, yes, Mayor. I think this is probably something that may be needed for the city on a temporary basis. It sounds like a good idea. I don't know if it's fully thought through. And I don't think I can support it because of that. I think there's too many questions that are left unanswered. I mean, we're talking about tying it to a specific date rather than our emergency. We're not going to charge any fees for it, but yet the staff are going to have to spend some time going over this to making sure that, and also making sure they're inspected in that. So I think that, again, I think this is something that could be approved, but I think it needs a little bit more thought and process to it. So because of that, I don't like to vote and approve things which really haven't been fully vetted. And so I'm going to vote against this. I'm sure this will probably pass, but I just think that the staff need to come back with some additional questions like the exit plan. What's going to happen when these people get these temporary things up, and are they going to make them take them all down and then apply? Or is it now it's just because they have it up there, they're going to pass this special review process. So that's all I've got to say on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I guess I might put a question just to Chris. This is being moved forward on an expedited basis on purpose because, it's the summer. We're trying to deal with an emergency situation with COVID, but would it be possible, given the circumstances, to get a staff update on how it's working, whether there's some other issues that have to be ironed out that council needs to be involved with. So Chris or Wyeth, however you'd like to answer that. Chris?
So Mayor and Council, first of all, I would want to thank Wyeth and his team, as well as our communities, Steve Arviskow and the Economic Recovery Team. This is an initiative that's come through that process of trying to help, frankly, restaurant owners and small businesses as quickly as possible get back on their feet and possibly have a little bit more space to be able to have more customers, recognizing with social distancing and other things, people are looking for that. So with that being said, I want to thank them for the work that's been done. Now, anytime you try to put something together in a matter of weeks, we may have missed something. Certainly the intent has not been. We would be happy to let you know, say through the weekly report, the end of the month or mid-July or whatever, how are things going? If we run into any substantial hiccups, we can certainly flag them for you. And if we need any regulatory change, we'll have to come to you for it. But we do believe it's put together. We do believe it's going to help these businesses. And I would be happy to circle back to you, say 30 days in, and let you know how it's going.
Okay, thank you. I saw Councilmember Ewald's hand and the Councilmember Brown and Purington. So Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. I got 3 questions. I'm just going to ask all 3 of them. Is this going to be a fenced off area in front of these places? It'll be permanent, or are they going to have to take tables and chairs in every night? The open container law, you're going to have some of these sitting like 2 or 3 businesses apart. What are you going to do to stop people from walking from one to the other with an open container? And then clear passage on the sidewalk. What is the minimum distance you're going to require? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Wyeth, can you address those fenced off, open container and clear passage way?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and council members. I'll probably need to defer if necessary to the chief on the open container question in terms of details there. But first of all, in terms of the fencing off, the coordination we've had with the Department of Revenue, who oversees liquor licensing and will have to be the first point of stop for any of these existing businesses that have liquor licenses that want to make a modification like this for additional outdoor area. They will work through that with the state and then with our city fire engineering and planning staff. It's our understanding from the conversations our city fire marshal has had with the Department of Revenue that they will be, they'll have to do some temporary fencing. It won't be where they take it down every night. It'll be temporary in the sense that it'll be up for the duration of this period. And instead of trying to have some kind of gate system on those temporary fences, the fire marshal and the Department of Revenue staff have discussed signage where there'll be an access point in the gate or in the fencing where people can go out. And it won't have some kind of closure. It'll have signage in terms of the requirements of who can be inside, because of the alcohol consumption. That's been worked out between those entities and everybody's on the same page with that. So that's kind of on that piece of it. And then clear passage engineering is going to be reviewing these if they're in the public right of way. And they will be looking to make sure that there's clear passageway on a sidewalk or area where there's pedestrians passing through, as well as one of these, if one of these areas is set up. And I believe in the information we provided back on this after Councilmember Nice's questions late last week, city engineering says that their area of walk through or pass through varies depending on the situation, but they generally look at 6 to 8 feet clear for passageway. Thanks.
Chief, did you want to comment on policing open container laws?
Certainly, Mayor. In this particular situation here, we wouldn't be bothering anybody that's going to be affiliated with a restaurant or a bar if they have outside accommodations for people. The thing that we're really looking at, if they're not in or around those areas, walking down the sidewalk, alleys, streets, obviously away from any dining facility, the tall boys, the bottle of wines, those type of things are what get our attention. So we're we're pretty judicious about, making sure people stay close to where they're supposed to be. But certainly, technically, it's a violation if you're outside of those areas with an open container, but not something that we're going to be picking on all the time and splitting hairs on.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions? I believe Councilmember Brown and then Purington.
Yeah, I just had a comment, I think, more than anything else. Going through the recovery on that recovery committee, we talked about this as well. And it's not that we're recommending that we open up a bunch of codes. We're not just relaxing codes. So they have to meet all the same codes that they would if they went through the whole process. The only thing we're kind of expediting is the process of them requesting it. So, I mean, Wyeth, isn't that correct? I mean, we're not giving up on any codes. We're not relaxing any codes. So all the walkways, all of that still have to be maintained.
Councilmember Brown and Mayor and Council, yes, I think that's generally you're correct in what you're saying. We're looking at abbreviating the process. These are temporary. Again, they can only be up until the end of this period. So we're not, if we were reviewing these as permanent installations like we do now through the special review process, that does bring up other issues in terms of the barriers and access with the building and ingress and egress and such like that. So definitely a little bit different there, but overall, yeah, we're looking at these in terms of, how people can move through the area. If it's in public right of way, we're looking at working with, obviously, like I said, with DOR to make sure that it's meeting the liquor licensing requirements that they have at the state level, and then also both from an engineering and fire standpoint locally. So I think you're mainly, the process, normally a special review, you're talking about several months to get through that from beginning to end. That would be most of the summer at this point. So we're trying to move those a little quicker. Thanks.
And just to follow up, Mayor?
Please.
And this is only for liquor, correct? This is not just for restaurants in general. This is just for the liquor and that.
Councilmember Brown and Mayor and Council, for this action that the council is making tonight is specifically, regarding the zoning requirements we have, the special review requirement because of all beverage and liquor service in these areas. So that's what this is related to. If someone wants to put a few chairs out in front of the Subway sandwich shop, again, if it's in the right of way or something, yes, engineering will be involved in that review, but that would be going through that process anyway. If this is because of the zoning requirements and that all beverage and alcohol service.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Purington and Councilmember Boyette.
Thank you. Wyeth, I think some of the questions that I had were actually answered and with what Councilmember Brown said, but also with the expectation of having this process sped up, then how will the expectation be there that they will be grandfathered in without special review?
Councilmember Purington and Mayor and Council, there can't be any grandfathering with this because you're setting a specific start and end date for this temporary allowance, and it also specifies in the resolution that these are temporary. This is not then allowing an installation to continue past this season and until the October 15th deadline. So these businesses are going to have to be also getting permission through their liquor license at the state. So we're going to be pretty closely tracking in terms of if that's again, it's temporary. If we get through October and then, next spring stuff starts getting put up, that's going to be an issue that the state is going to have and we're going to have because of liquor licensing and those allowances.
Follow up, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
So do you have any expectation of how many will be applying for this? And what is the length of time rather than the lengthy process, which you said could be months? So what is the length of the process going through this speedy process that you're wanting to do?
Mayor or Councilmember Purington and Mayor and Council, in terms of the process, From talking with engineering and their review part and with fire and planning, I think we're looking at probably a week to get through the reviews on these. Maybe a little bit longer, depending on working with the state. Again, the Department of Revenue is already aware of this, so we're pretty much set up to be able to move them along fairly quickly. In terms of the other part, what was the other part of your question? I'm just lost.
Do you have any expectations of how
number.
many are going to do this?
Councilmember Purinton and Mayor and Council, I don't have a good real sense. I know from talking with Katie Easton with the Downtown Billings Partnership and with Lily Corning, who she manages a lot of properties out in some of the developments on the West End. We have interest out there, but I don't have a good idea of a number right now that might come forward. We anticipate you could see somewhere they've got existing outdoor area and they just want to modify or expand that, what they have, versus somebody trying to do a new little space. So I think it's going to vary in that respect as well. So I know, like talking with Katie downtown, she had about 3 locations that she'd been visiting with property owners on. And I don't know from Lily Corning, a specific number.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Boyette. And then Councilmember Trickey and Joy.
Thank you, Mayor. Wyatt, we've talked a lot at the zoning meetings about having code enforcement look at things prior to a complaint. Would we be able to have the ability to do monitoring of these facilities versus a complaint coming in, from a citizen for noise or violations?
Councilmember Boyette and Mayor and Council, the planned approach is engineering has specified that they will check on these periodically, the ones that are in the right of way, to make sure that they're not starting to have encroachments or things are blocking where they shouldn't. So they're going to be looking at these, at the beginning and then off and on, checking on them to make sure they're not having any issues. Fire and planning at this point are not planning to do ongoing checks. We'll review the initial layout and what's proposed. And then certainly if there is a complaint, we will take that as the basis to go and make, have them make changes. But engineering is going to be the one that's going to be mainly checking it for those, something's blocking a sidewalk or something like that.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Trickey and Joy, did you have questions?
Actually, I was ready to make a motion, but if
that's fine, unless there, and we'll still have an opportunity for discussion. So at this point, we don't have a motion. So if you'd like to make a motion, sure.
I move that we adopt the resolution to temporarily suspend zoning regulations for outdoor patios and seating areas.
Is there a second? Councilmember Joy has the second. Okay, so the motion is for approval consistent with the staff recommendation. Discussion on the motion. Any discussion on the Councilmember Ewald and then Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. For the businesses that are already expanded out into the sidewalk, so in order for them to have a larger group, can they expand into their neighbor's sidewalk right away if it's not a business of the same, that it's like a retail store or something? Is that going to be a possibility for them to be able to increase their bottom line like we're trying to help everybody else?
Wyeth, can you answer that, or Chris?
Well, Councilmember, if I'm understanding you correctly, so you're asking if one business already has an outdoor seating area in front of their business and they wanted to expand into the adjacent neighbor businesses out area in front of their store, is that what you're asking?
Yeah, I mean, we got to affect their bottom line too, because they can't expand anymore. They're already there.
Councilmember Ewald and Mayor and Council, I guess we'd have to look. I know what, in talking with Katie Easton downtown, a couple of the businesses that were interested in this, they were talking about doing it as like 2 or 3 of them together and having an area where they would have, seating area for, and these were not necessarily ones that were serving alcohol. They were just looking at putting some seating outside. So there was some coordination on some of them. I guess if there was a discussion like that with existing and looking at how it would fit, we'd have to look at that and see what the proposal was. I wouldn't be able to respond specifically to how that might work, given that we'd have to see with the situation, and engineering would have to be a big part of that conversation.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Nice.
Thank you, Mayor. Wyeth, I had a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind. You mentioned that I think you're not going to be charging a fee for this, and so if you could answer what is the typical fees the city would collect under a review similar to that, as far as just a quick rough estimate of the total, and then to clarify, this is not just for downtown, but this is for the entire city establishments with liquor licenses. Is that correct?
Councilmember Nice and Mayor and Council, I'm trying to look up the fees for you. In terms of the area, correct, it covers the entire city because it's tied to any business that has an alcohol license for service that might want to either expand an existing licensed outdoor seating area or have a new temporary one. So it is the whole city. One clarification also, while planning wasn't planning to charge a separate fee, in conversations with engineering, and this was information I had passed back to you all as well, they are going to still, for the encroachment, have a fee and application, mainly because in talking with City Engineer Debbie Melling, for tracking purposes for them, for areas within the right-of-way, and the way they're set up, that was the easiest, I think, best way for them to do that. Those are nominal fees, I think $60 for the encroachment, and then depending on whether it's an expansion or new regarding the area. So there is going to be that the city would be charging. Our special review fee, if you're going through the whole process for a commercial special review, it's $1,300 normally for that whole process.
Okay.
So yeah, thanks.
And Mayor, if you don't mind, I have another question for Brent Brooks.
Sure. Brent, are you in one of these boxes here? There, you've got him.
Brent, this special, the resolution is tied to a specific date, I believe October 15th. If for any reason the city's emergency declaration is canceled prior to that, would this require this to be terminated prior to October 15th, or would this continue on even though the emergency declaration has been suspended or revoked?
Yeah, based on the way the resolution is currently worded, this would continue until October 16th. So if the council wanted to tie this to the revocation, if you will, of the emergency declaration, I could certainly work with Wyeth to accomplish that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to make a comment. It's my understanding that this came out through DOR Montana, through the state, and then also the Resort Tax Association also was pushing this. So I think whenever we say it's for the entire city, it's for the entire state. I think this is something for the entire state. So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, Chris, maybe you can comment that. I don't know that background. I know in mid-April, I saw a article of the national news about something similar happening in Europe, and recommended that staff get on this and work with the DBA and the recovery group. So I thought it was local, but I don't know that. Maybe Chris Kukulski, you know?
My knowledge is local as well. I have no idea what's going on elsewhere in the state, but my interest in it, our interest in it was through the economic recovery group and the conversations about how to help our local economy. So I certainly think their cooperation has been critical, as Wyeth has worked directly with DOR.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Anything else? Wyeth, you wanted to follow up there?
Yes, Mayor, just really briefly, the only thing I would say that because when we talked to DOR about this at the state level, there was some language when the governor was making his declarations regarding the phases and moving forward. There was some language that was included there addressing some of this in terms of encouraging the state to work with businesses at this level. And so that was pretty broad, but that came out. And when we contacted our staff counterparts at DOR about this last month, they were aware of that too and said, yeah, we've been talking about this internally. And so they were already kind of in the loop, but I don't know how many other communities are acting on this, but that was certainly something that they were aware of. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other discussion on the motion? If not, we'll proceed to a vote. So the motion is in favor of item 1J, consistent with the staff recommendation. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor, council members Boyette, Cole, Shaw, Joy, Ronning, Chariki, Yakowicz, and Purrington, Ewald, and Brown. If voting in opposition, please raise your hand. Councilmember Neese, the motion passes. Thank you. And consistent with Councilmember Neese's questions, staff could give us some sort of report how it's going in the relatively near future. I think that would be beneficial for everyone. Councilmember Yakowicz.
Thank you, Honor Council. I make a motion to approve item K1 and 2 with the abstention of Mr. Councilman Brown.
Thank you very much. Is there a second? Councilmember Neese seconded that. So this is for approval of the bills, May 4th and May 11th. Discussion. Is there any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Motion passes unanimously with Councilmember Brown abstaining. Brings us then to regular agenda item number 2. Tony, would you read regular agenda item number 2?
Item number 2, public hearing and first reading ordinance amending city charter by repealing and replacing section 1.05.1. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. Chris, we've got a Brent Brooks down as a presentation. Is Brent beginning this or is it yours?
Yeah, if Brent could kick us off, I'll come in after Brent. He's going to kind of cover the formalities here. I'll cover some of the high points and we'll go from there.
Okay, City Attorney Brent Brooks, it's all yours.
Thank you, Council. I'll be very brief. This is the first of 2 steps that will be necessary to place the public safety mill levy on the ballot of a special election for the voters within the city of Billings to approve a charter mill levy amendment. And although the process is unwieldy and confusing under Title VII of the Montana Code Annotated, one of the ways in which your city charter can be amended is by city council action through an ordinance. And of course, the ordinance is required to have a first and second reading. And tonight is the first reading and therefore the first step of the process to provide for a public safety mill levy to be presented to the voters of the city of Billings. And you will notice that the ordinance itself is very brief and pretty much summarizes the intent of the council as you have communicated to Chris and the chiefs, et cetera, as we've drafted it. And I will also mention that the mayor and Councilmember Neese and Councilmember Chariki have also been involved, along with many staff, in drafting not only the ordinance, but the ballot resolution. I will also say that the second reading of this ordinance, together with the so-called ballot resolution, will be on your June 22nd meeting. And perhaps arguably the more important of those 2 documents at that time will be what we call the ballot resolution that contains the language that will actually be on the ballot itself. I don't want to get ahead of that process, but tonight it's the first step. So you have a public hearing and first reading, just like any other ordinance. And this is required by state statute as the first step in amending your city charter to have a mill levy election that goes above the charter mill levy limit of 74 mills.
Thank you, Brent. Are there questions for staff before we open it up for a public hearing? The public hearing, anybody who's out there who wants to comment, the phone number will be 237-6196. But are there questions? Of course, later we'll have a motion and we can have an opportunity for discussion, but are there questions for staff? Councilman or Chris Kukulski. Chris.
I just want to hit on a high level. I know the council, we've talked about this a lot over the past month, though one could say this has been a minor component of a major discussion we've been having for almost 2 years. For those who may be watching, who this is the first time they're kind of keying into this, I want to hit the high points, which is, as the council is well aware, we're looking to repeal the ordinance that was adopted by the voters in 2004. That ordinance, that charter amendment, allowed the city to levy up to 60 mills. It was phased in over 5 years, but at the end of that 5th year, it would have been up to 60 mills, which is what they anticipated being necessary to generate $8.2 million. The 8.2 is what was capped as a revenue. And so thankfully, since 2004, the city of Billings has grown its tax base almost 50%. That has meant that this levy, generating 8.2 million, has cost the general taxpayer a little less every year. The unfortunate side of that has meant it's not had quite the purchasing power that it had in 2004, and therefore to help us deal with kind of shoring up the base of our public safety revenue foundation, the council's asked that today we bring forward a 60 mil levy for the voters to consider. So we've tried to keep it as simple as possible. When you see the actual resolution and the ballot language, I think we've done that well, and yet it would be fairly simple for someone to maybe misunderstand. We approved 60 mils in the past. Why are you asking us to approve 60 mils now? What's the difference? Well, the difference is that 60 mils is dropped to today to be 40.17 mils, generating the $8.2 million. So just in case someone's watching for the first time, want them to know how important this is. It does generate about $4 million more if our citizens say yes to this, which will definitely help in the foundation of our public safety budget. Though I do want to be clear, this does not add additional resources to that capacity. So it doesn't add to our capacity to provide public safety services. It helps us secure kind of the base that we have today. So with that, we'd be glad to answer any questions after the public hearing, but I thought that was some important kind of high level component to make sure is on the record. Thank you.
Yes, very important. Thank you, Chris. Any questions for staff before we do go to a public hearing? Seeing none, that phone number 237-6196, we will open the phone lines for public comment. If you'd like to be heard, call that number 237-6196 on this item number 2. You'll have 3 minutes. We'll need your name and address. Please mute your television or your computer, because what you are seeing is actually behind the actual meeting by close to a minute, and you'll be messed up, and we'll be messed up if you try to listen, both to what's on the phone and to your TV. That number again, 237-6196. We'll give it a little bit of a delay because of the delay in the television production here. Tony, please alert us if anybody is calling in. Tony, are you seeing any calls?
I have not received any phone calls.
Okay, alert us in the next few seconds if one comes in. Hearing nothing, we will go ahead and close the public hearing on item number 2 then, and open it up for motions or others. Councilmember Purington, I saw you.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion.
Please.
Having conducted a public hearing, considered written and spoken public testimony, I move to approve the first reading ordinance repealing and replacing the current public safety mill levy in City Charter Section 1.05.1 as recommended by the staff.
Thank you very much. I saw Councilmember Niece's peace sign. So we have a motion that's been seconded for approval consistent with the language that you see in your packet and the staff recommendation. Further discussion on the motion. Council members Shaw and then Joy.
Thank you. I, no surprise, will be opposing this, and I'm not going to belabor the reasons that we've already talked about, but I did want to add that I feel like what's happening in our country right now deserves more time, and I personally feel that we need to have a conversation with our citizens about what they actually want a public safety package to look like in what this new world is. And I mean, council received over a dozen emails today from people advocating for similar things. So I'm really listening to people. As I've talked with constituents, I have yet to meet someone who says, yes, this is a really great idea. That's just what my experience with it. So I, again, am going to advocate for us waiting and coming back next year and really taking the time to have the conversation with Billings about what do you want this to look like? And maybe it looks different than the package we'd initially thought. That's okay. But I think the public should have much more of a chance to weigh in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Joy.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I had a meeting with Ben Helverson, who prosecutes the domestic violence partner abuse cases, and he told me that they are now running at 100 complaints or cases a month. If that continues on through the end of the year, there are 12 months in a year, you all can do that math. This public safety mill levy does not add resources, and that was discussed at length. So I would like council to remember, as we are out there communicating this to the public, that we continue to acknowledge that we have considerable need to have public safety addressed. This is one little part of it. It does not add resources that are necessary for us to have those cases which represent victims who deserve justice. It does not contain those resources to really address some very important needs that we have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on the motion, which is for approval? I saw Councilmember Ewald and then Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you, Mayor. This is for Mr. Brooks, I believe. We're amending the charter. Is this a formality? Is this state law? That the charter has to be amended before the vote goes out to the people? Because if it gets turned down, then do we have to re-amend the charter back to what it was originally? So we got 2 amendments to the charter, and is this something that needs to be done, or is it just a formality, or what is it?
The Honorary Council and Councilmember Ewald, this is actually required by state statute under the section in 7-3-103 covering charter forms of local government, and the charter must be amended by the local government if that is the process through an ordinance. So this is required by state statute, and the ordinance simply, in essence, refers the issue to the voters. And so if this is voted down or disapproved by voters, there will not have to be a subsequent amendment or anything like that. The measure is defeated and the charter continues to exist in its current format, as well as the 2004 levy that's in your current charter.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Ronning had a
Thank you.
something.
Chris, this is for you. So if we do nothing, and I know we've had this conversation already, but just to clarify for the public, if we do nothing, as Councilmember Shaw would like for us to do, in regard to, I know you want us to go up for another one, But Kendra, it takes time. And right now we're working on 2021 budget. As I understand, when we would go out for another mill levy, that would be the 2022 budget. So another year out. So if we do nothing for this coming 2021 fiscal year, what is the impact to the city?
So Councilman Ronning, Mayor and Council, generally speaking, if you took the proposed budget for 2021, so my city manager proposed budget, if we did not take this to the voters and the voters don't end up saying yes, it adds, we would need to utilize about $4 million more from the reserve. The result of that, in concert with not shifting any resources eligible cost to Park District 1 and or making cuts to the proposed budget, if none of those three things take place, then in the spring of 2021, so about a year, a little less than a year from now, about 10 months from now, is when we would anticipate we will have spent all of our additional reserve above and beyond the minimum kind of best practice. So if we don't increase revenue or we don't cut cost, that's where we will end up in March, April, May 2021. Then we would have to either go below those best practices of reserves or make cuts to better structurally kind of fix the budget.
Okay.
I hope
And
that
a
answers
follow-
the question.
Sure, yes. And a follow-up, Mayor?
Please.
Okay, thank you. So my apologies, I completely just forgot my question. I was thinking about what you were saying, Chris, so sorry. Sorry, I completely forgot my question. I was thinking about what Chris was saying.
You can come back to it.
It'll come back to me. It'll
it
come
comes
back to me.
you.
Thanks.
Councilmember Purington has not spoken to the issue, and then we'll come back to Councilmember Shaw. Councilmember Purington?
Penny, all I can say is that I'm glad I'm not the only one that does that. But so the question back to Chris for further explanation, whether it's voted down or it fails. No, if we vote for this and the public votes for this and there's no shift to PD1, and yet there could be additional cuts whenever we actually go through the budget, then what is the scenario?
So Councilmember Purington, Mayor and Council, under that scenario, we would buy ourselves time, right? We would get into the next fiscal year budget before we would be using that reserve level to that amount. So again, in round numbers, we're using about 7 million. If none of these steps were taken, no cuts to the budget, no additional revenue, we're about $7 million of reserve dependence. So if this gets passed tonight and voters approve it, 4 of the 7 is resolved. Still, though, you'll have 3 more in reserves you'll be using than revenue coming in, 3.3 roughly. So just that savings account will last longer. I'm going to give you a ballpark. 6 months plus or minus longer is what it would last. Not a whole nother year, but it would get you maybe a half a year more if no other things changed.
Follow up, Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
So based on what Denise was talking about, I think this is the other point that's to be made with the public, is that the public safety too is separate from the general fund, which the things that Denise was talking about with the domestic violence, the prosecutors, the legal system, if you will, within our city. So I think for the public to be aware that we do realize that we're not actually fixing the general fund. We're addressing just one minor piece piece to this puzzle of how do we fund public safety as a whole. I know the fire department has wants, the police department has wants, legal has wants. You know, Mayor Cole just mentioned about mental health and addiction issues. So I know that it's not addressing all of those, and it's just addressing a piece of that with public safety too. So yes, and I think this is Kendra's big rub, is that we are going to have to come back. And I think being forward with that and let people know we realize what we are fixing. And I think if we can just fix public safety too, without having that cap at $8.2 million, I mean, I think that's a win for everyone. I think it's a win for the city, for our police and fire departments. So is it a complete fix? No, but I think we recognize that and we admit that. So thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Shaw.
I hear that, and I did not want to belabor this, but I guess maybe it needs a little bit of belaboring. I want to be very clear. My position has never been that we should do nothing this year. I think that would be incredibly irresponsible. I would never advocate for that. My big issue is, yes, what you addressed, Pam, but also it's the fact that we're not solving a problem yet for me. We're not either getting the budget balanced or increasing investment in public safety. And so to me, it's this little piece, but I want the problem solving. And what I've heard from council is so much resistance to the PD1 movement. I'm not trying to get into that debate at all, but I'm just saying the other two options are $3.3 million in cuts or pulling $3.3 million from the reserves. I can't see myself supporting either of those scenarios. So it is really the package deal in terms of what we're getting. And I want to be very clear about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. Thank you, Pam. You triggered the thoughts that I had. Absolutely, this, as what you said, this is not the entirety of a fix. And I think that we've had that conversation already. We were going for the fix. And the public actually has had a lot of time to comment on this. We've been talking about a public safety mill levy now since Denise, Bill, myself, and Frank were all elected 2.5 years ago. So this has been a long conversation that we have had with the public, and that there has been a lot of conversation about a public safety mill levy that people have had the opportunity to chime in on. I don't think that it's been lacking opportunity for the public to give comment. But also, Chris and I had a conversation earlier today because I wanted to clarify with him, if we approve this ordinance and if the public also votes and supports this ordinance, what we're doing is helping to keep what we've got now in place, which if we don't keep what we've got in place, very good chance that we lose. So not only is the next ask a bigger ask than what we were even talking about earlier of going after a public safety mill levy, it's going to be a substantially bigger ask. And I think someone commented, it might have been Tom Zerbuin, I'm not really remembering, in one of the last meetings about the incremental increase and being supportive of that incremental increase, and that it's easier for people to adjust an incremental increase than it is pulling back the rubber band and shooting a huge increase into their tax bill, which it would take to correct and fix the problem. I am all about fixing this problem, but this gives us the opportunity to not go backwards as the chiefs have asked us to. Plus, this gives us the opportunity to have that discussion with the public on what they would like to see moving forward, but it prevents us from moving backward. So I want to thank Roy and Danny and Bill for the time that they put in and working with the staff on writing this ordinance and the resolution. Those are not easy tasks. So truly am grateful and thankful that you all stepped up and were willing to put that time in. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other discussion? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Penny, for your comments. And I also want to thank Gina. She was on the committee. Andy for putting up with us all the comments that we were making while he was typing up some of our stuff. So he took that well. But I want to realize that even though this is not we don't look at this as a fixing the public safety. We have to also look at this. This is fixing a structural financial issue with our city's budget. And so there is some fix in this. And of course I am a finance guy. And so I know that every time we annex a property, that's going to add to the public safety. Every time the taxes are reassessed and there's an increase, that's going to add to the public safety of this. So I consider this a structural fix that is going to help us into the future. And like Penny said, the ask will not have to be as great, because this is going to be growing. You know, in the next year, it's going to come a little bit more. If we annex more properties, it'll be more. So I understand, Kendra, we need more. Denise, I agree. I think there's other things we need to look for the attorneys and that. And I think that'll be coming in the next budget cycle, the next year, if not sooner, if we can. So those are, yeah, you're right. This is not a cure-all, but this is definitely fix some things and bring some money to the table. And like Penny said, we're not going to go backwards on this. We're going to be able to retain those officers, the firefighters that we have today, so that we're not having to look at cutting them severely. And to the point about the 3.5 million in cuts that the staff will bring into us, this is a look at to see what it's going to take. We need to take a look at that. We may, like Councilman Brown said, we may not take them all or any of them, but we need to look to see what it's going to be in those cuts. So that's all I have to say, Mayor. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to talking to the public about this, to really explain it, and hopefully we'll get this passed in September.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on the motion, which is for approval? The only thing I would comment on is a radio story I heard driving into the meeting tonight. The national economists have now officially told us we are in a recession. Talk about the blatantly obvious, but it's now official. They also identified it as the largest contraction in about 70 years. And so the reality of that is that it will take multiple years to climb back out of. And so even though I'm cautiously optimistic that if we come back to the voters, maybe in a year they would approve something, we can't be sure of that. And so we may not even be able to put something else before the before the voters next year, and they might not pass it. And so if we can get something now, it will allow us extra time in case we need to wait even longer to approve a more major fix. Sometimes said that the perfect is the worst enemy of the good. And in this case, I'm willing to accept the good if the voters will approve it. Any other discussion before we proceed to a vote? Seeing none, then all in favor of the motion, which is for approval, consistent with the staff recommendation, please raise your hand. Yes, I was concerned we hadn't had public comment, but we had. The motion, voting in favor, council members Boyette, Cole, Joy, Ronning, Neese, Tariki, Yakowicz, Purington, Ewalt, and Brown. If in opposition, please raise your hand. Voting in opposition, Councilmember Shaw. Thank you very much. The motion passes. Stay tuned. This one is not over. We'll see you next week. I will just put in a word. If people on the ballot language, try to circulate those internally. Maybe we can work out some changes before the next meeting. I think it's in pretty good shape, but it's always difficult to draft things collectively, and we won't have any extra time. So we want to make sure that's ready to go for second reading. Okay, with that, then we'll move on to item number 3. Tony, would you read item number 3?
Item number 3, public hearing and resolution establishing collection, disposal, and landfill fees for FY 2021. Staff recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of staff recommendation.
Chris Kukulski, I think our agenda says that Jennifer DeRay is going to make a presentation on this. Is there anything you would like to introduce?
No, I think Jennifer is got it. There's Jennifer there. I don't have any introductory comments. We did take your direction from last week, and maybe Jennifer can talk about how that's been inserted. So
thank you very much. We'll hand it over to Deputy Director of Public Works, Jennifer DeRay. Jennifer?
Sure. Thanks, Mayor. Tony, I don't know if you can help me out here, but it says that I'm not able to share. Host has not enabled that yet.
we're all sharers in the organization, so I know Tony is going to be willing to share with you.
Jennifer, I just allowed you, I set you up as co-host.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, can everybody see the presentation? Okay, I'm going to be fairly brief tonight in summarizing the proposed FY21 solid waste fees, and I will talk a little bit about what the 5% that's in the council memo, and then the added 10% from last week as well. Missing a few slides here. Hold on just a minute. Okay. So the monthly residential collection fee is $11.25 per month. This comes to about $2.60 per week for both regular pickup and for yard waste pickup for 8 months as well. The rate study that was conducted last year was a 2-year rate study, and it recommended a 2.5% increase in solid waste collection fees for FY21, which would generate about $245,000 in revenue. A 2.5% increase would amount to 28 cents per month. Due to the economic impact of COVID-19, no increase in collection fee is proposed. The actual calculated cost of service rate for residential collection, however, is $14.64. So about 23% of the residential collection fee is being subsidized by landfill fees. That comes to about $1.7 million that is being subsidized right now. The risk always of subsidizing fees is that it would mean a very large increase in rates if we were ever to lose that ability to subsidize. And while it doesn't look like that's maybe in the near future, it could be lost, that ability to subsidize, if we start pricing the landfill side high enough to drive customers to go somewhere else. We do have a major phase 6 expansion coming up in about 6 to 7 years to the tune of about $14 million. So we will already need some fairly large landfill rate increases to support that project. So like I said, it's probably not imminent, but it could happen in the next decade where we're not able to maybe subsidize so much from the landfill side of things. The residential collection rate comparison for various cities is shown at the bottom of the slide here. Our rate is always considerably below all other cities surveyed. So we're at 1125. The next closest is Great Falls at 1365. And you can see it goes all the way up to 5275 per month. Last month or last week, there was council discussion where a pay-as-you-throw system was brought up a little bit, a system where those who are using more garbage would pay for that use. Just wanted to remind council that we had already committed in Public Works to bring that back to council at a later date, but we do need to finish the conversion of our shared residential alley containers to our individual 90-gallon containers before we were able to go to a pay-as-you-throw system, but we will be back with those options. For roll-offs, really quick, we're recommending an 8% increase per the rate study that was conducted last year. It would generate about $65,000 in revenue. And then for landfill fees, we recommended a 5% increase per the rate study to generate an additional $250,000 in revenue. The council memo and resolution that was in your packet had to be finalized before last week's council discussion, in which you wanted us to come back with a 15% increase for the non-City of Billings rates. So we're presenting those new rates tonight, and if this is what council desires, you would just need to include the change to 15% in your motion tonight. 5% City of Billings increase and a 15% outside city and out-of-state increase would generate about $550,000 in revenue. With these increases, the outside city rate would be 44% more than the City of Billings rate, and the out-of-state rate would be 73% more than the City of Billings rate. The City of Billings landfill fee per ton with a 5% increase would increase by 99 cents to $20.84. The outside City of Billings fee with a 15% increase would increase by $3.91 to $30.02. And the out-of-state fee would increase by $4.71 to $36.11 with that 15% increase. The City of Billings customers, the collection fee is actually already included. The landfill fee is included in the collection fee. If residential City of Billings customers bring additional trash to the landfill, that amounts to a normal truckload. They're not charged at the gate. The city also has an agreement with Yellowstone County in which we charge the county itself for the estimated county residential self-haul tonnage. So the Yellowstone County residential customers also do not pay at the gate. They are assessed that from Yellowstone County. And that's, again, if it's just a normal truckload size. So this is why when you go out to landfill, the scout house attendant always asks each person city or county. We just track that and tally that and the weight, and we use that in calculating the amount that's in that Yellowstone County agreement each year. The agreement with Yellowstone County will utilize the rates that are passed tonight, and it will be on the June 22nd agenda for your approval. The chart at the bottom of this slide shows where our trash is coming from currently. Only about 2% comes from out of state, 19% is from Yellowstone County, and another 11% is from other counties in Montana. So a little over 2/3 of our waste is actually City of Billings waste. And the landfill fee comparison here shows both the 5% recommended increases as well as what it would be if the outside city rates were increased by 15%. You can see that with the 15%, the non-city rate would be more than Bozeman, but below Kalispell, Great Falls, and Helena still. And the out-of-state rate would still be below the Wyoming landfill rates at this time. So if council does vote for the 15% increases for that additional revenue again this year for the non-City of Billings landfill fees, we have a couple of options to propose in utilizing the additional dollars. The first would be to move the construction of the composting facility forward a year, as well as move the design and construction of the MRF or the material recovery facility forward by a year. And the other option, it would be to save this additional money and earmark it for that large phase 6 expansion project that I talked about, thereby reducing the amount that we will need to debt for that project in the future and reducing our future debt service. So that is all I have for council for a presentation. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Jennifer. Questions from council for Jennifer. I'll ask you to just go ahead and there, now I can see everybody. So if you'd like to be heard, you can raise your hand. Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Jennifer, where would these customers go? It sounds like you are a little leery of this 15% increase because you're worried that you'll lose customers.
Councilmember Purington, I just want to make sure that you have all the information in making the decision. I don't believe it's a huge risk at this time.
Yeah.
I just wanted to point out that's always the risk of raising the rates so high. So, but I don't think that we are in imminent risk of them going anywhere else real soon.
A follow-up, Mr. Mayor?
Please.
But where would they go? If they did go, where would they go?
Councilmember Purington, you know, we have the Wyoming customers. If they got to a point where the hauling all the way to Billings was just not worth it with the rates that we start charging them, they could go to a different landfill in Wyoming. Other counties could go, you know, further west rather than coming over to Billings.
Okay, thank you.
Chris Kukulski. Chris.
The other piece I just want on the table is not so much a fear or concern about losing those customers as it is the idea of using landfill revenues to offset or subsidize collection. Absolutely legal, but I just think you should always pay attention to that year in and year out, and just be careful not to overload that. I did go through a process once where we closed the landfill operation. We're a long ways away from that in Billings, I think close to a century away. But that was a similar transition. When you're subsidizing one side of your business with another side of your business, you run the risk of not really having market rates on both sides. So thank you.
Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer, when you figured that amount, what it was like 500,000, did you say? Is that just considering the 10% increase or the 15% increase?
Councilmember Ewell, it was 250,000 was the 5% across the board. So an additional 300,000 to 550,000 is the additional 10%.
Okay, so I would like to see just the 10% increase from last year and the 10% increase if we pass it for this year be set aside in a fund. And I think that would be a great place to put it. That $14 million improvement you're talking about, that's the grinder and the separation of materials where we reclaim it. Is that what it is?
Councilmember Ewald, no, the grinder and the separation, the MRF facility, that one is that first option, which would be to move those forward by a year. So we would actually start composting, the construction of composting next year and the MRF the following year.
Follow up, Mayor?
Please.
Please. I'm not talking about the composting. I'm talking about, isn't it planned to put a grinder in to separate like plastics and steel and wood and all that stuff out of the garbage? So it saves room in the landfill, plus we can take that stuff and reclaim it somewhere else, like selling the metal. Is that in the future?
Councilmember Ewald, yes, that's that second project, the materials recovery facility. That would be what you're talking about there.
How much what's the cost of that?
It's about $5 million.
Okay, so I would really like to see that money get set aside for something like that, because that's improving the landfill and it makes it better, not just for the residents, but for the out of town and out of state people also. So that would be a good place to set that money aside for. But can I have a couple more questions, Mayor?
Sure, and we'll get to our city administrator. I know Chris wanted to jump in there too.
Okay, I got a question on this, Jennifer. It's on Schedule 1 residential mobile home collections. That's on your this thing for tonight. What is residential carryout service for $22.50?
Councilmember Ewald, that is for our elderly or people who just need additional assistance. We actually go up to the door and carry that out for them, and they don't have to wheel it out.
Okay. And then the other one is the residential landfill fees for newly annexed property not yet receiving city collection, and that's $2.76. So is that $2.76 over and above what McKinsey or Republic charges them a month, or is that their total cost to the landfill is that much, and McKinsey and Republic charge that much to them?
It would be the additional over what Mackenzie and Republic charge. There's actually a law where they can choose though to have us or to have Mackenzie and continue having who they want for a certain period of time. And I can tell you in the amount of time that I've been in Public Works, we have never charged that $2.76. But we do have it on there in case we ever need to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chris Kukulski, you wanted to jump in, and then Councilmember Boyette and Nice.
I just want to make sure it's clear. I think it is, but the MRF, the recovery facility, is not the same as the grinder. So the MRF, I think as you describe it, Councilmember Ewald, will allow us to separate, therefore extend the life, recycle, do those kind of things. And what Jennifer indicated is we may be able to move that project up a year with these additional revenues. So I was just worried that people were confusing the grinder with the MRF. They're two separate things.
Thank you. Councilmember Boyette and then Nice.
Thank you, Mayor. Maybe this might be for Dave Mumford, but I'm still trying to figure out why, for getting the out of city, out of state, why would we not charge the citizens in Billings the cost of their service? Yes, we're making it up from out of state, but why wouldn't we at least have them pay the cost?
So you're asking on the difference between what we're going to charge for residential collection and what it actually costs us?
Well, I think it was $11 we were charging the citizen, and our cost was like $14.
The majority of that, and Jennifer can also comment, but the majority of that is the not having the rate increase this year, and by going without a rate increase, it puts us behind what is the inflationary costs bring us up.
Mayor and Council, what I would add is this: I think it's purely a philosophy that the councils have carried forward, that we use landfill profits, for lack of a better term, to underwrite garbage collection. If we weren't doing that, solid waste collection would cost more. That's purely a question for the 11 of you. We could charge what it costs, and then those extra dollars for the landfill would be able to more quickly pay off or build these capital investments that we're making at the landfill. But it's my understanding it's been a choice in Billings to use that landfill not only as an incredible landfill asset, but also help subsidize or keep down pickup garbage collection rates. Now, there's one very meaningful, significant kind of aspect of this I've seen in every community I've worked in, and whether you own a landfill or not, it's just a lot easier when you own it. And that is, there are times spring cleanup or times of the year that if we weren't subsidizing putting things in the landfill, we would have a lot more trash in our alleys, on some of our streets, and some of our neighborhoods. But that's a separate issue, candidly, than what we're talking about.
Okay, thank you. There's some other hands. I apologize. I kind of lost track. Councilmember Nice, yes.
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer, I just had a quick question. You showed that graph there where we were, kind of in the middle on the some of the charges there. But on the subsidizing, do you know if the other cities on that chart are subsidizing from their landfills as well? And if so, by how much?
Councilmember Nice, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
Chris Kukulski, you want to comment there?
I mean, I can tell you that in the Flathead, this goes back almost more than 15 years now. Flathead County's the landfill is run by the county, not the city. So I doubt it's subsidizing because they're two separate entities. Now that's the case in Bozeman as well. It's the county region district landfill. Bozeman got out of the landfill business about a decade ago. So there's no subsidizing coming from either of those two landfills, to my knowledge, to the ratepayers, as they're different operations by different governmental entities.
Dave Mumford, I saw your camera click on. Did you want to comment on that question?
Just that Helena doesn't own the landfill. It's privately owned. I think Great Falls is the only other large municipal landfill that's owned by the city.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Chiriki and then Councilmember Purington.
I have 3 questions. You want them one at a time?
Whatever you think best.
Okay, so the first one is, it's just an informational question. Are we accepting radioactive waste from the Bakken?
Dave Mumford or Jennifer?
No, we don't, council member.
Okay, good. That large number in Eugene, do you know if part of the reason for that is because they have a large recycling program?
I do not know what Eugene's, how their rates were established.
Yeah, okay. And my last question, I live just off of South Billings Boulevard. And probably about, on the average, about every 6 months, I get a flat tire. So my question is about the uncovered load fee. Is that collected very often? And do you think it's high enough?
It is not the collection rate has dropped because people are starting to use the covered loads more regularly. But the fee was.
That actually answers the second half of the question.
Exactly.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Councilmember Purington and Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So on the, I just learned this, Jennifer, from you, that the residential carryout service, you said that that was for our elderly, I suppose, maybe our handicapped individuals. So we're charging them double what if the trash truck just comes by and picks up your trash? Is that true?
Councilmember Purington, yes, the rate is double, as it takes a lot of extra time for our driver to get out and wheel it out and then back in. So it's charging for the time incurred.
So, Mr. Mayor, may I follow up?
Please.
So I would be more, because usually those people are on fixed income. And I would also assume, that may not be correct, that they would have less trash, especially the elderly. That I would rather do the 2.5% increase of residential rather than having that high of a rate for these particular individuals, because I think that little bit of help, the city could afford to do that. And that's an opinion. I don't know that that's a question at this point. I'd probably like to hear some other council members weigh in on that. And one other question, Mr. Mayor.
Please.
Does the county have to approve our rate increase?
Councilmember Purington, they do not have to approve our rate increase, but they have to approve the agreement that we have with the county.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. The flat tires out at the landfill are actually a result of the hailstorms. You can cover those loads all you want, but the nails and the staples rattle out through the bottoms and the cracks of the trailers. So it has nothing to do with loads being covered. And I myself ended up with flat tires going out there, but I know what it's from is it's coming out of the bottom of the trailers, not the top. And can I have another follow-up, please?
Sure.
I would like to make a motion that we increase the out-of-state and the out-of-town landfill fees, the tipping fees, by 10% more than recommended by staff. And we use that to make a total of 15%, and we use that for expansion at the landfill only, not to take that 10% as a subsidy.
I'm going to suggest that we hold off on that motion because we haven't had a public hearing yet.
Oh, okay.
But I think we've had a lot of great questions, and I'll proceed to a public hearing unless there's some other motions before we do so. And then we'll come back. Councilmember Ewald will give you your first opportunity after the public hearing you'd like to renew that motion. Would you be willing to withdraw it for the purpose of having the public hearing first?
So done.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. And you can start announcing for public comment if you'd want now. I just have a quick question for Jennifer.
Yeah, I'll just repeat that phone number so people are prepared. 237-6196, 237-6196. When we open public comment in just a minute, you'll have 3 minutes. Councilmember Neese, go ahead.
Jennifer, Pam brought up the issue about the pickup trash, the carry out. How many customers are on that program?
Councilmember Ewald, I do not know that at the top of my head, but I could send it to you tomorrow.
Okay, yeah, it'd be interesting to know if we were to match the rate or lower it something, what it would cost the city. I agree. If there's some issues there with some disability they can't get out or something like that, then maybe we should look at a different rate structure for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it's 100 or 200, somewhere around there.
All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Chris Kukulski. Chris, you're muted.
Sorry. Want to answer part of Danny's question. I do not know about Eugene. I can tell you I'm glad to pay my last monthly payment this month to Bozeman for anything. That rate is, I do believe it includes both solid waste, garbage, because that's about 15 a month, and recycling is about 11 a month. So I think that's a combined rate for both recycling and curbside for a smaller garbage can. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yeah, there's no doubt the recycling program would add some significant cost. Okay, we'll move on to a public hearing after we hear from Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer, I just want to make sure, I know we're talking a lot about out of town and out of state and all of that, but we are in fact moving forward with your recommended increases for residential and everything else, right?
Councilmember Brown, during the discussion last week, I believe it was a 0% increase still for the collection side.
My motion was to move forward with all recommended, and then Councilmember Ewald just modified the 10% for out of state and out of town. So all of those rates should be increasing.
Okay, it was my understanding that Andy clarified at the end, and it was decided that because the landfill side was going to go up by more than we recommended, that the collection side would still remain at 0%.
Okay, if that's everybody else's understanding, I didn't understand it that way.
Okay, we'll continue the discussion. That's an important point. We won't decide that. We'll wait till we've had public hearing, but if there's some clarity on that, Councilmember Purington.
And I think that was part of the discussion too, was that if they didn't increase it by the 2.5 or 2% this year, the next year they would increase it by 4%. So I would, same as with some of the other things that we've discussed, those incremental increases I think are better than getting hit with a bigger increase. So I don't know where we landed at the end of the meeting on that no increase on the residential, but I would be for the 2% increase, and then the decrease on the what was it, our seniors and handicapped individuals.
Okay, thank you, Chris Kukulski. And I don't have any clarity to add because I wasn't at your meeting last week, but Chris and then Councilmember Neese.
Council members and Mayor and Andy, I may need your help here. What I recall from a week ago is we had a spreadsheet specifically on the screen, and it showed all the percentage adjustments if we would have done the inflationary changes. And though it took, I think, 2 motions to get there, the council had approved in their direction. It wasn't approving the rates, but in their direction that we would include all of those adjustments in the proposed budget. And I apologize, I thought the solid waste collection one was there, but I could be mistaken.
No, actually, I believe what Jennifer recalled and what I recalled is, well, that's what I recall. What Jennifer reiterated was that at the end of the meeting, we clarified that the residential collection rate was to remain flat at 0% because the increase to out of state was, or out of city was going to be 15% to offset that amount. Was the general direction. Again, as you said, not rate setting, but just direction for staff.
So I'm sorry, Mayor, do we happen to know, Andy, what the number would be, either the cents or the percentage, if it would be, if the collection rate were adjusted by an inflationary amount?
I can pull that up. Jennifer may have it off the top of her head there. I don't know if she can jump on.
So that number was the 2.5%, or for residential, it's 28 cents per month.
So I guess, Mayor and Council, if, and I apologize for my confusion there as well, if you want to include that, I would just include that after the public hearing. In the motions, you got 3 potential things we're hearing, this 28 cents and the 10% addition to the out of state and out of city. If you want to take all 3 actions, if you'd please include those in your motion, I think that would be clean what you want done tonight.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to a public hearing then. If you're listening and you'd like to comment, the phone number is 237-6196. At this point, the direction of the council is not perfectly clear. We'll try to address that once public hearing is closed, but what is on the table is a certain increase of landfill charges, a possible increase of those proposed charges for out-of-state users, and also either keeping the collection rates for residential users at the same as they were the current year, or increasing that by some inflationary amount, probably in the vicinity of 2.5%. So that's what the council will be discussing, but now's your time for public comment, 237-6196. If you would like to comment, call that number. We'll need your name and your address. You'll have 3 minutes because the actual meeting is being held about a minute ahead of what you are hearing on television or on your computer screen. Please mute whatever you're listening to the meeting with and just listen to what you hear on the phone. So we'll give you just a extra few seconds because of that delay to call in at 237-6196.
May I have your name and address, please?
Tom Zerboon, 1747 Wicks Lane. I believe I'm the instigator of charging extra for people outside the city limits. Years ago, it came up with water and sewer. There was like 9 different units in the city where they were outside the city limits, but were getting city services at no additional cost. Dave Mumford explained to me that all the money collected for these rates had to stay in that department. And I said, that's fine, because that will lower my rate, allowing my budget to have that little dab of freedom, making it easier for me to pay my taxes, which subsidize these same people because they're using our public safety and our streets, etc. I urge you to keep all of this money doing exactly that, lowering our rates so that we have the ability in our pocketbook to pay the ridiculous taxes you keep stabbing at us. If you're going to stab us with these huge rates of actual costs and throw the money around ridiculously, let's just end it. Let's do something for our taxpayers. Make it easier for them to pay the taxes. You got another one you just voted on to approve, a tax increase. Help us make that tax payment by lowering our garbage fee by this 15%. Don't put it aside for something in the future. That's coming anyway. Everybody's going to pay it. They'll pay their 15% on it too. So please lower our rates by these out of city people so that we have a way to try to pay these ridiculous taxes when our tax bill comes. Thank you for the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, do we have any other callers?
I do not have any other callers.
Okay, then we will close our public hearing on item number 3, collection, disposable, and landfill fees, and move on to a motion and discussion. Councilmember Ewald, before the public hearing, I said I'd come back to you, so here we are.
Thank you, Mayor. I would like to move that we increase out-of-state and out-of-town tipping fee by 10% over recommended 5% to make it a total of 15%. And to use the 10% increase from last year and the 10% increase from this year for future expansion or improvements at the landfill, so that we have the money there to help keep the costs down.
Okay, so there's 2 components of that. One is the revenue increase in out of town, out of state users by an additional 10% over staff recommendation, and then also a use component for future budgeting. And the second, Councilmember Chiriki would like to second that. So motion is made and seconded. Discussion on the motion, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. To go back to the comments about as far as the residential rates, I remember Andy bringing that up at the end of the meeting last week as well. And we did not address as far as increasing them over the staff proposal of 0%. So I agree with Frank. We need to have that extra money. Frank, I don't remember if your motion included last year's money, because I think there's 300,000. I don't know what happened to that money, but hopefully that hasn't been spent yet. It could be put into the same fund to help with that as well. So I don't know if the staff can address what happened to that $300,000. We can make sure that gets added into the fund.
That sounds like a question for staff. So I don't know if Jennifer, Dave, or Chris would like to address that.
I'd like Jennifer to help me out here, or Dave. I think Jennifer's got the data.
Okay, Mayor and Council, yeah, we have that money still, that cash still in our solid waste fund. We never increased the budget to spend it on anything else, so we still have that money available.
Okay, thank you very much. Further discussion then on the Councilmember Ewald's motion, Councilmember Brown.
Thank you. So Jennifer, can you clarify for me, with this 10%, basically a 15% increase for out of town and out of state, that 500,000 extra, that is above and beyond the cost of operating the landfill then. So that offsets any undercharging or whatever for our city residents, correct?
Councilmember Brown, that 300,000, it's actually 300,000 extra that we would generate from the additional 10%. And it does not offset, the 300,000 doesn't offset the residential underpayment, because we're actually subsidizing about 1.7 million per year right now from the landfill side.
Okay, so how are we covering that 1.7 million or whatever? How are we covering that?
Councilmember Brown, that is additional landfill fees that we are already generating above and beyond what we need to run the landfill.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you very much. Other comments, questions? Chris Sikulski.
I'm sorry. I think it would be helpful for me for a little bit of clarity, Councilmember Ewald. Do you want us to use the $500,000 plus or minus from last year and this year? It's producing extra cash for us. Do you want us to use that extra cash to move up the MRF construction project, or pay down, borrow less money when we go to do projects on the current timeline? I think those were the two in our opinion, maybe you've got a different use for it, but the two, I think, most efficient ways to use that extra cash. And then arguably it's not extra cash. It helps us get those projects done.
Councilmember Ewald, go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. I guess my idea of this is, you know, when you got your checking account at home, you don't spend everything you got. You try to save some for a rainy day, or to add that garage onto your place or something like that. And that's what I think we should be doing with this landfill, this extra book. Keep it there. There's future plans to expand the landfill to put this MRF or the separation deal at $5 million. And then we don't have to go out to borrow money to do that. We'll have the money when we get ready to do it. We just pay it off. I asked last Monday night if we could pay principal down on the loan we got now, and I understand why we can't, because it's a revenue bond, and so you have to set a certain amount of time. So this is not involved in that. So we would have the money when we're ready to do it. We pay cash for it. It's kind of like the equipment replacement plan that we got.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, so just to clarify to my own mind, Chris, my understanding from Councilmember Ewald's answer is that his main concern is the money just be set aside for that project. And that kind of ends there, but that it be designated for that project. Okay, further discussion on Councilmember Ewald's motion. Stating the obvious, it leaves in place the no increase for residential rates. Is that the intention of the council? Councilmember Treaky.
I'm seeing these as 3 or 4 separate issues at this point.
3 or 4 separate issues, but does that mean you want to come back if this were to pass?
I intend to come back with at least two more motions.
Okay, so just to clarify, this will not be the conclusion of this item. Is at least Councilmember Treaky's mind anyway. Okay, so further discussion on that motion. If not, we'll proceed to a vote on Councilmember Ewald's motion. Councilmember Neese.
I would like a clarification on the motion, because I agree with Council Member Tricky. I understand Frank's motion to be only regarding tipping fees and the use of those funds. And so we're not addressing the full request right now. Is that clear?
That's the movements and the second interpretation of their motion. So that controls. So the motion is for 10% over and above the staff recommendation on out-of-town landfill fees to a total of 15%, and then segregating the extra funds created in that way for the MRF project, with the understanding it does not rule out further motions that we will entertain if this motion passes.
Yeah.
Is the motion then clear? Councilmember Brown.
So entertaining additional motions would not be tonight on this topic, correct? I mean, this motion pretty much closes out this item.
I think with that clarification, it does not.
Okay.
It is not intended to exclude further discussion of item number 3.
Okay, if that works, I'm good with that.
Brooks, let us know if we're sailing into improper procedural waters, but with that clarification, I guess we're okay.
Your Honor, you are correct.
Okay. Further discussion on the motion before a vote? Was there any further discussion on the motion? If not, then all in favor of Councilmember Ewald's motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor, it is unanimous, so that element is approved. Continuing now the discussion on item number 3, Councilmember Treaky.
I think there are 2 other issues. The easy one, I think, is what to do with the carryout program. So I think we'll just continue to keep these things separate. And I'd like to make a motion, therefore, to, I guess, to eliminate the charge for the carryout program, and that we would just continue to do it for no charge.
Okay, that's the motion. Is there a second? Councilmember Purington?
I will second it for discussion.
Okay, thank you. One question I guess I would raise for staff is if there is no charge, right now it's $2.76. And I believe that Jennifer said there's only Councilmember, it's a different number. Councilmember Ewald, I think, is saying, well, whatever the number is, the question is, will that trigger a lot greater use of that service if there's no conditions on who can use the charge? Maybe some sort of charge at least acts as a small deterrent would be the question. Chris Kukulski?
So I doubt we'll know the number, but that would be my question to Jennifer and Dave. Do you have any idea what kind of dollars? If we're subsidizing at 1.7 million today, that number is going to go up. In order to
just to correct what I said before, Chris, it's $22.50.
Correct.
And that would be roughly well, it's exactly double of the regular residential pickup. So
two concerns I have here is how much money will we actually no longer collect? And I'm going to suspect it may not be hundreds of thousands, but it's probably tens of thousands. And then secondly, is it only elderly and handicapped? I have worked in places where some individuals say, my neighborhood, we don't want our garbage can sitting out by the street, and we're all willing to pay double the rate to roll the can out. And we've provided that as a customer service. So I don't know, is it exclusively for folks who need it? Do we have any way we check that to know that they need it versus someone just wants it?
Okay, thank you very much. We've had several questions. Maybe Jennifer can answer what might happen to usage if there were no charge.
Council and Mayor, so I would guess in terms of dollars, we're talking 100 or 200 people currently, it's $10,000 to $20,000 a year is what we're talking about. We have no restrictions, no requirements on what anybody has to prove or anything to get this service. So I would imagine it would increase the service by quite a bit if people could get it for anything. And we would just be doing a lot more carryout service.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Neese?
Thank you, Mayor. And that's one of the reasons I asked Jennifer the number, because I didn't think it was substantial and wanted it to be brought back to us. I think this is something that if we are going to charge the same amount, we need to have a policy in place. So I would ask that we withdraw the motion on this until the staff can bring us back with a policy that says some criteria that we meet so that we can then charge the same rate. I'm all in favor of giving someone who in need a break like this. But I think that it's correct. If we take this off, I may call up and ask for roll-on service. I mean, if it's not going to cost me any more, I forget to bring my can to the street sometimes. So let's all do it. So I think we need to actually have a policy in place before we just cut the fee.
Thank you very much. There's still a motion, Councilmember Treaky.
I'm willing to modify my motion so that we direct staff to look into changing this policy to include two different categories. One where we charge regular residents who just want the carryout service, and one where we do not charge people who are demonstrably disabled, elderly, or there's a third category. I don't remember what it was, but you get my drift.
Council members, I believe, was the third category you were looking for.
I thought it was just mayors.
That'd be okay too. Okay, so that's the proposed modification of the motion just to direct staff to come back with some proposal with criteria for elderly, disabled, other qualified people. Does the Councilmember Purington, you made the second, does that consistent with, is that okay with you?
I think so. I don't think my intent was to not charge at all. That was not my intent initially anyway. It was just that we didn't charge them more. And I did not realize citywide that you could have that rollout and not be charged extra. Is that the case, Jennifer? I'm in the middle of a motion. I realize that, but just to understand, is that rollout specifically for handicapped or elderly right now?
Councilmember Purington, that is the intent, but we have nothing in place right now as far as a policy requiring that. So I'm not sure if there are others on the service. Okay. Right now we use double the monthly rate. So I think mostly it's probably people who actually need it. And to clarify my earlier number, I did find out that it is right at 200 people that we have on the program right now.
Then I will go ahead and go with that second one of Danny's, that we look at, go to staff and get some sort of numbers and, devise some sort of a policy that might address that.
Okay, thank you. So that motion has been modified. Councilmember Brown.
I guess my only question or comment on that would be, with that policy, we're going to have to figure out who's going to shuffle through all this paperwork that's going to be a result of figuring out who's handicapped or disabled or fits into this elderly category or whatever. So, I mean, splitting this thing out into all these different groups is going to be, kind of an administration nightmare too. So, if we could maybe get numbers on what that's going to cost, maybe we just leave it alone. So.
Okay, so the part of that direction to staff, if this motion passes, would be a cost element as part of this research. That certainly makes sense. Chris Kukulski?
So, never say never. Things change, right? And circumstances you don't fully understand. I don't fully understand. 3 cities, 21 years, every one of them had solid waste service. I've never had a complaint or an issue where somebody truly needed to have curbside rollout, pickup, and we needed to do something to set it up beyond what the city of Billings is doing. So maybe this is a really important thing to do, to look deeper into or expand, or maybe we really let it function the way it's functioning right now from a time commitment standpoint. But that's totally your guys' call, because I certainly agree. The policy side of it is exactly the kind of work I want you guys doing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councilmember Tricky, before we proceed to a vote on this motion. Councilmember Tricky?
Yeah, part of my reasoning or reason for doing this is that as we've been making the switch from the really big dumpsters in the alley to the smaller ones out front, the people who have complained to me the most are elderly people who do not feel like they can drag their canister out. And I've been saying to them, oh, well, don't worry, we have a residential kit, we'll have somebody come and move it out there for you, And I just found out tonight that we're charging $22.50 for that, So this is partially a mea culpa trying to fix something that I've been advising people to do and whatnot. So,
okay, thank you very much. So Councilmember Ewald's hand and then Councilmember Purington.
Thank you, Mayor. We're only charging them $11.25 because the other $11.25 is actually for garbage pickup. But the neighborly thing to do is, if you got somebody that can't do it, help your neighbor out, move it out for them. I mean, I can see that if we put this down to 0, I'm getting old. I might need mine rolled out too. And especially when the wind's blowing, because then it rolls down the street and I don't have to worry about picking it up. So, I mean, when we start giving stuff away for free, watch the people sign up. And it's like Councilmember Brown says, who's going to shuffle the paperwork and figure out, well, he's not quite as handicapped as the next person, so he doesn't get it or she doesn't get it. So yeah, it'd be a handicap nightmare, a paper shuffling nightmare.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Purington?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm wondering, is there, I know that they have property tax assistance through the county. And I know that they have different types of programs for property taxes. And I don't know if that can be based on that. I'm definitely not asking for a free pickup service, but I think it should at least drop down where it would be more reasonable for these people. I think there's something like 25% of Billings are elderly and handicapped. So I think there may be some leeway there that we can look into it at least.
Okay, thank you. Of course, the definition of elderly is a moving target. So it wouldn't have to be the young elderly, I suppose. Staff could come up with some other criteria, I suppose. And certainly disabled. Okay, any other discussion before we proceed to the motion, to a vote on the motion, which is to ask staff to direct? Councilmember Neese, you wanted to? No. Okay, so we'll move to a vote on the motion. Councilmember Ewald?
Could you repeat the motion? Because we've had several additions and subtractions, so I'm not sure what the motion is.
Sure. The motion is not to take any final action. The motion is not unlike in a work session to direct staff to look at this issue further and to make a recommendation either to continue with the existing fees or to propose a different schedule where the at-home charge or without having to roll it out to the street charge would be reduced based on certain criteria such as disability, some degree of elderly at some age, or other criteria that might be fair in order to reduce that charge. Councilmember Ewald.
Are they going to have that back in time for budget this year, or consider it for budget and bring it to us next year?
Chris Kukulski, what's your preference?
No, for this year. That's in like 10 days. The packet's got to be put together. My request would be when we come back to you to talk about, all of a sudden the phrase escapes me, but pay as you throw, or, the more, as we look at that rate structure, that this would be a component of that, if that would be acceptable.
Okay, longer term, but as part of that much larger revisiting of the rate schedule. Yeah. Okay, so all in favor, we'll proceed to the vote then. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor, council members Boyette, Cole, Shaw, Joy, Yakowicz, Treaky, Purington, Ewald, Ronning, and Neese. If opposed, please raise your hand. In opposition, council member Brown. So thank you very much. But again, my understanding of that is that was not intended to conclude our discussion of this item. We are still on item number 3. If there were other motions out there, Councilmember Treaky, just a reminder for everybody, we're at 7:38. As soon as this item is concluded, we'll probably take a quick break. Councilmember Treaky.
So I'm not 100% clear on what the staff recommendation is right now. So is the staff recommendation right now for all the other rates is not to include an increase, a cost of living increase? Is that right?
We'll ask for staff to clarify that's consistent with my understanding, and that wasn't because they didn't want the money, but because of COVID-19 and economic realities with our taxpayers and ratepayers. Jennifer or Dave or Chris Kukulski?
So-
Chris, you want to start us there?
Yep. So Mayor and Council recall, the proposed budget did not include a series of inflationary adjustments. However, last week, which the mayor wouldn't have the benefit of last week, as the motions were to make those adjustments and put them back on rather than to kind of double them next year, I would advise doing them across the board. And I think solid waste collection maybe is the only one that you wouldn't be doing if you don't pass the 28 cents tonight. 28 cents isn't going to kill us one way or the other. But to answer your question, if you want to do it consistently, I'd add the 28 cents to collection. If you don't, it's okay. Next week, you'll need to make those other adjustments or as those rates come in front of you. And you've directed us to do that.
Thank you very much. Since I didn't have the benefit of last week's discussion, can I ask staff, either Dave Mumford or Jennifer DeRay, about in their minds the necessity, the certainty of a double inflation rate next year if we do not raise it this year? I recognize if we do not raise it this year and we only increase by inflation next year, you're kind of you've built in a permanent deficiency. But is this really a situation where we're looking at a double increase next year? If that's the case, I have certain sympathy for Tom's point that better to have a couple smaller hits than one really big hit. But Dave or Jennifer, can you address the inevitability of a larger increase?
Mayor, go ahead, Jennifer.
Mayor and Council, yeah, going forward, it would, we'd have to get that caught up at some point. When we did our rate studying, and we always look a few years out, it was projecting about 2.5% rate increases for the next several years. So we would be asking for probably a double rate increase next year if we didn't get it this year.
And Mayor, if I could add to that, part of that rationale would be not just what inflation actually is, but in many of our public works areas, as well as parks as well, we are trying to get caught up on replacement schedules. So as an example, you may recall utility rates, pipes. I think our pipe replacement funding schedule right now has a pipe lasting around 190 years. Pipe doesn't last 190 years. It lasts half that long. So we're trying to, I'd say those consistent rates aren't just tied to inflation, but we're also trying to not fall further and further behind on that replacement schedule, similar on the transportation side of the house.
Okay, thank you very much. Councilmember Joy?
Sorry, I waited too long. Mayor and Council, I was going to also ask about the problem issue statement on the agenda. I didn't hear that we have addressed the issue of 11% increase in tire rates and an additional fee for disposal of mobile home rates. Was that addressed in Councilmember Ewald's motion that we passed? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. It was my understanding that Councilmember Ewald's motion included all of the staff recommended increases, but also those. So there was some disagreement there because Councilmember Ewald is shaking his head, and his second, Councilmember Tricky, is also shaking his head. So I apologize. I should have tried to clarify that. Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. My motion had only to deal with tipping fees from out of city, out of state.
Okay. All right. With that clarification, and that was the intent of the second, Councilmember Tricky. You're agreeing with that, Tricky?
Yeah, that's correct. So I'm ready to make the last motion, or what I hope is the last motion, which would be that we accept the rest of the staff recommendations with the exception of the solid waste residential fee, and that we change that to include the inflation.
Okay, so the motion is to accept the rest of those staff recommendations, plus the inflationary increase identified by staff, which was, correct me here, is that exactly 2.5%?
28 cents. Jennifer, can you help me there? 2.5% or 28 cents for the residential customer?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, so we won't refer to it in percentage terms, but in 28 cents for the average residential customer comes out to. Okay, second by Councilmember Boyette. Now Councilmember Joy.
Just a little further clarification. Does that 2.5% increase in residential and commercial or only residential? Thank you.
The 2.5% that we were originally recommending was for both residential and commercial.
Thank you.
And I assume that's consistent with the intent of the movement, Councilmember Treaky, and the second, Councilmember Boyette. They're both nodding their heads. They agree it's intended to apply to residential and commercial. Discussion on the motion. Councilmember Purington and Councilmember Neese. Councilmember Purington, you're muted.
Okay. So the 28 cents, the 2.5%, is that across the board? It doesn't matter as far as property value or anything like that?
I believe so, but can staff, Jennifer, can you confirm on that, that the rate is irrespective of property value?
That is correct. It's just a per each basis that we charge for solid waste.
Thank you. Other discussion on the motion? Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. Jennifer, so the only rates that we subsidize is the residential pickup rates. Is that correct? Not the commercial?
Councilmember Neese, that is correct. If we do not increase the commercial side by the 2.5%, we would be starting to subsidize them as well.
Okay. And I think it was Chris or someone mentioned that we don't want to get too far out from the cost of service, and I agree with that. I don't know if it would help, instead of looking at an increase like this, is maybe just saying that we keep the residential service at a 20% of cost of service, and that way, as inflationary costs go up, that we always have that number there. It's an easy change. That way we know we're never 20% out of cost of service. I would suggest that maybe consider that and maybe amend the motion to something like that if there's interest in setting that for a future policy, that we wouldn't have to worry about this getting too far behind, and yet we still keep up with inflation.
Okay, Councilmember Treaky.
I agree with Councilmember Neese that we do need to come up with a policy to get the residential fee to catch up to the actual cost of the fee. But it was not my intention to do it in this budget cycle.
Okay, thank you. So it's not part of the motion. I mean, it's a good point to think about. My thought would be to be aware of the law of unintended consequences. That would be a big policy step, certainly a good one, but without further investigation, might be dangerous to tread into those waters right now. So the motion, though, is to accept the rest of the staff recommendation plus the 28 cents increase for the average commercial user, or I'm sorry, average residential and commercial user. Councilmember Ewald.
Thank you, Mayor. Unintentional consequences. That was a pretty good term. I know it's only 28 cents. We're kind of trying to paddle a canoe upstream with this public safety vote. Is this 28 cents, is that going to be one of the consequences of the outcome of the public safety vote, even though it's only 28 cents a month? That was the reason I didn't include it last week and bringing it forward. I agree with Councilmember Neese and Chris that we do need to start getting that more in line with what it actually costs, but is this the right time to do it?
Thank you very much. Good question. I guess the obvious answer is we may be back next year and 28 cents might be better than double 28 cents, but Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, kind of my point exactly, Mayor Cole. You know, we're gonna have to come back for a public safety. We're gonna have to come back for a parks. We're gonna have to come back for all of this stuff eventually. I mean, we can't just stop business as is. You know, we're already supplementing garbage pickup and everything else. Now we're talking about possibly subsidizing, business. I mean, we can't just keep going further in the hole, because of this pandemic. I know it's bad and all that, but if we just put it off, kind of kick the can down the road, we got to pick it up eventually. And it's going to be a mess if we have to try to catch up all of this in 2-3 years. This is a small increase. It's the standard that we've been doing just to try to keep up. I really think that we've just got to move forward and at least keep the costs of what we've got to have to keep functioning. I just don't want to push it down the road again.
Thank you very much. Any other discussion on the motion before we proceed to a vote? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote then on the motion to accept the rest of the staff recommendation for those other charges like the mobile home charge, et cetera, plus the inflationary increase of 28 cents for the average residential and commercial user. If the motion is clear, all in favor, please raise your hand. Voting in favor are council members Boyette, Cole, Shaw, Joy, Yakowicz, Tariki, Purington, Ewaltz, Ronning, Brown, and Neese. The motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. I think the implication of that was we are now done with item number 3. And previous movements put their thumbs up, so they are in agreement. So we will deem that item concluded. It's 7:52. We have one more item before we break for executive session. It's the eBird tax increment assistance. It might take some discussion and there's a public hearing. So I do think we should take a very short break and then come back. Let's start 8 o'clock. It would be 8 minutes or earlier if everybody's back before then. See you then. Thank you. Curry. We need Pam and Roy. We got Penny. We'll wait for just a minute, see whether Pam and welcome back, everyone. We are now on item number 4. I'll ask the clerk to read item number 4, and I'll also apologize. Right before we took our break, I suggested there was a public hearing for this item, and Tony corrected me that's not correct. We already had the opportunity for public comment on this item at the beginning of the meeting, so there is no public hearing. Tony, would you please read item number 4?
Item number 4, tax increment financing assistance from East Billings Urban Renewal District, eBird, to Trent Curry for demolition of 2 residences for future redevelopment, $21,400. Billings Industrial Revitalization District recommends approval. Action, approval or disapproval of Bird recommendation.
Thank you very much. Chris, I believe that Wyeth has the opportunity to start us off. Is there anything that you have before we turn over to Wyeth? Okay, so Wyeth, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. And I'm going to start off actually by having Zach. He's going to make a brief presentation on this item on behalf of the Bird and the eBird, and then we can go from there. So I'll let him start us off.
Okay, Zach, welcome to the Brady bunch. I'm not sure which brother you are. One of the older brothers, it looks like. So with that, anyway, welcome, and it's all yours. You've seen this done before, so go ahead and tell us what we're looking at.
You bet. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council. Yeah, this is my first eBird presentation. I've been another about 7 weeks, and I wanted to give you a quick history of this presentation. On June 5th, 2019, Mr. Curry, we had a presentation from the Bird Board at the beginning of this project where he did a demolition on 2 properties, 217 and 217 and a half North 20th. This is a continuation of that project that was approved back in 2019 to finish the demolition on this property. These were 4 houses that were in pretty bad condition. The exciting part for the Bird is that this allows this property to be prepared for additional development in the Railspur Village, which we hope is kind of a mixed use neighborhood. We can continue to develop that forward. So I think, yeah, that's what I have. It's eliminating blight in that area that is pretty significant and hopefully kind of spurring us along with development along that in that neighborhood.
Great. Was there any presentation from Trent that he'd like to add to that, or is that it? Trent, it's yours if you like.
Really, we're just here for the second phase of that removal of blight. We're excited to get these last 2 homes removed and have the properties ready for development. And it's a real simple proposal.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll open it up for questions of either staff or eBird staff, Zach, or the developer before we look for a motion. Are there questions for anyone? Councilmember Boyette.
Hi, Wyatt. There were so many emails that got lost in the conversation, I think, but I mean, basically the question came down to is the cost is about $41,000 to tear it down. The proposal is to give them $21,000, about half of the cost of demolition. Then we look at the policy, basically realizing we can go away from the policy, but it's typically $5 and then we give in $1. Can you give your rationale of why we should give half instead of 1/6? Pretty simple question.
Councilmember Boyette and Mayor and Council, basically, and yeah, there was a lot of information that we went back and forth and shared with council on Friday and then today as well, just trying to clarify some things with the application and working with Zach and with Trent. I guess two things on that conversation. First, as you pointed out, the policy does, it has the preferred 5-to-1 ratio, but does allow the council to act and consider other amounts in terms of what the request is. This is very much similar to the request that was made, as Zach pointed out, last year in the first phase of this project. I think last year was for about 62,000 was the total demolition and project cost, and the council, I believe, approved in the around 32,000 last year. So this one is also in that same ballpark of about half of the amount. This is a very clear match in terms of both the eBird master plan and what the eBird, that urban rural district, is trying to accomplish in that area to remediate blight, clean up some of the properties and then encourage redevelopment. It's also because it's demolishing old, unsafe and abandoned, basically uninhabitable structures, that it also matches very well with urban renewal law and funding that would qualify for that. And these properties have had significant law enforcement law enforcement's been called a lot to these properties. Code enforcement's had a lot of cases on these properties. So there's been a lot of work to try to address these in the condition and the situation they've been in for the last few years. And so it's a very both fitting application and fitting amount of funds, I think, to spend to get these demolished and get this ready for redevelopment and take this off the books in the sense of the work the city's had to do to try to address criminal activity and such in the property.
Okay, thank you very much. Other questions for staff or developer or Zach? Councilmember Bernice.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I'm not sure if that answered the question as far as the rationale why we're going to do 52% instead of, the 16.67%. When I look at our policy, we already know that we're going to be removing blight, demolishing houses. And that's what the policy was established for, was that $5 to one, and then we'll put in $1. So what I'm not hearing is a rationale to move forward on. And I don't disagree that this is a project that should qualify. And I think that we should give that 16.67, about $8,000 or $9,000 towards this project. I don't disagree with that. But what I want to hear is how we can do this for one investor in that area, and then the other investor we don't do it for. And there's no guidelines to say, well, we just did it because he's a buddy or not. I mean, there's no real guidelines and principles to make sure that the TIF is held accountable, that we're held accountable, that we're just not sending it to someone that we like versus someone that we're not. In the communication that we had back and forth, there was, I don't know who said it, but the average is a 27 to 1, or anyway, it seems to me like and this is 52 to 1. So how are we treating one?
Oops, you froze.
Yeah, Councilmember Nice, I don't know if you can still hear us. You have frozen. We'll give you just a few seconds. If it doesn't come back, you may need to hang up on us, and we'll let you continue your thoughts if you reconnect with us. I think he's calling in to Tony. So why don't we continue, and we'll bring him back to Councilmember Bernice in just a minute. Do we have, we'll also give the developer an opportunity or staff to respond to that important question, but we won't do it now because Councilmember Bernice, we don't know, is listening. So other questions right now, Councilmember Purington.
Thank you. A couple of things, and this just came to mind whenever you made your presentation, was that I did not realize, it was not on anything that I read, that this was a continuation of the project from last June. And I was aware of that, but I did not realize that this was a continuation of that. And this is the first time I've ever heard of Rail Spur Village. I don't even know, is that some sort of a project that Trent has going on? Is that something that the eBird is developing? I've never heard that. And I agree also with that rationale of using such a large percentage to accommodate Mr. Curry's project. And one other thing that I didn't agree with was in the 715-4233 on N, as far as I think it was $1,200 for the permits. I don't particularly think that goes into that. I think that's a stretch to put it in there. And so I would also have my doubts that would be something that should be included in the costs. So those are my 2 cents.
Okay, Councilman Purington, did you want somebody to address what Rail Spur?
That'd be great, because I've never heard of it.
So,
Yeah.
Zach, can you enlighten us there, and then we'll go back to Councilmember Neese, who is animated again.
You bet. Thank you, Mayor. And Councilwoman Purington, it's something I look forward to as we get together. I get the chance to visit with all the council members. There's a pretty dynamic master plan that was put together for the eBird. And in that master plan, there's sections of the eBird that are both trying to develop along with the city, but also maintain both the old town history of the district and also allow for a lot of the industrial businesses to continue to operate there. It's part of that master plan, which is something, again, I hope to show everybody individually. And I think Wyeth and I were just talking today about just some further education down the road of how these different master plans exist and what part of those need to be activated per both our board and, again, the direction that the city's trying to take on different issues. So the Rail Spur Village is just a designation of a neighborhood that exists in that master plan that sits between 4th and 1st and near 20th to 18th in that area that looks for creating more of a neighborhood feel, some public space development. And right now it's full of mostly underutilized residential places, empty homes. And these 4 in particular were in pretty bad shape. So hope that answers that.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Neese, you're back with us. We had you, you had expressed the question about the percentage of subsidy relative to the 5-to-1 preferred ratio. Was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
Just a really good rationale of why we're giving 51% to one individual and not to everyone. I mean, we have a policy. I think we have to have a good rationale why we're going to deviate from that policy. And I have yet to hear, that reason why.
We'll turn it back to staff to take another stab at that. I guess what I heard when I read the application, and in my mind, and there's obviously no black and white perfect answer to this, but to me, the benefit, the reason to go beyond that 5-to-1, 1 out of 6 ratio is the degree of public benefit from getting rid of what is now costing us in police response, possible crime, the visibility of it, which impacts the whole neighborhood in a way that just improving private property might not, and the relatively low dollar amount. If this was a much larger dollar amount, you'd have to look at those benefits much more strictly. The other problem with small grants is there's a lot of cost of processing the grant. And so if you go to a 1/6 subsidy, at some point it's not quite worth the developer's effort because you don't have the economy of scale. So those aren't perfect answers, but in my mind, I think those are relevant. Wyeth, was there anything you wanted to add to this? I mean, you understand the question. It's a good one.
Yeah, and actually, if I could just back up just one step here on the Rail Spur Village, I just want to add just quickly to what Zach described. And he was correct with the way the eBird master plan had looked at those areas. It also matches up, the eBird then also adopted a zoning code down there, and that rail spur village is also an identifier of zoning in that area, which is exactly like he described. It looks at types of residential and mixed use type development, and that area kind of is transition between the current downtown and as you go further east into the eBird. So it's a zoning designation too. It's in our zoning code for that area. And so that's also, when you hear that reference, that's what's tying it into that. So then just back to the question, and I would agree. I mean, I agree with what the mayor is saying, because that is part of what I laid out in the memo, the benefits of this type of a demolition, this type of a project, for the reducing the other costs and impacts both for the city and the neighborhood is significant. And so that's important, and I think is a reason to consider this and consider the difference in the amount. It's also a small project, which was already stated. And I guess the last thing is just, if there's, we see a lot of different projects that are very different across all three districts for lots of different funding requests. And so I think this conversation is good in terms of the council wanting to, and some council members wanting to nail down further kind of what ratio we're going to do here and how can we be consistent. I very much get that. I think it's extremely challenging because of the differences in lots of applications, which I believe, and I don't want to put words in any of the council and the mayor's mouth who were part of the policy development, part of the reason we left that option to not just lock it in at 5-1 was very much these types of issues where you're trying to look at the different benefits and values of different projects and how big they are, how small they are, what their impact is. So I would say I'm certainly open to more guidance in this area, but I think it gets tricky the more you dial it down, the more things start to become not possible, and then you've restricted yourself on different options. So I think it's important to have this conversation, and if there's ways that staff can do better when if the council's very focused on that ratio, and if we're going to stray from that we can then explain it. I would also just, and this, I don't want to get us off on another topic, but I was visiting with Andy, our finance director today, and I visited with some of the other district folks, and I'm still honestly confused that this 5-1 has become a $5 to $1 and not a I have $4 and somebody has and there's $1, and so it's a 20%. It's been really interesting we're down to 16.6%, which I don't think was the intention of when the policy was developed. I think it was supposed to be $4 and $5. So we need to work on that too, because it creates some really interesting math on some of these that I don't think was the intention of the policy to begin with, and what we were expecting from private versus public sector. But that's a separate item we can work on. But just wanted to mention it because it's getting thrown around a lot, and I think I would say personally I'm not clear on what exactly we're calculating if we're doing this 16.67. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. It certainly does require some clarification then, and maybe at least some examples of what might justify a variance from this 5-1, whatever that means. Even if they're not strict rules, at least examples of factors that might be taken into account. Seems like we could improve that policy. I saw Councilmember Ewald's hand, and then Joy and Shaw.
Thank you, Mayor. Last year when this came up, I asked the same question I'm going to ask tonight. And that is, why couldn't all 4 houses be taken down at the same time? It costs money to mob in and mob out. I thought, Wyatt, you said that there was no reason they couldn't have been taken down at the same time, but yet it seemed like there was a reason they couldn't. And I don't know how wide those lots are, if they're like 30 feet, 40 feet, 50. I'm not sure. They're not very big. But if you got in there with the excavator, you could probably hardly turn your excavator around without hitting the house next door. That's how close together they were. So what's the reason that this wasn't all done at one time, and we wouldn't have to be going through this whole thing again to where we're having to decide how much money to give them again? We gave them some last time. If it would have been done all at one time, I'm sure the cost would have been quite a bit less, and everybody would have saved money on it. So Can you give me a reason that this could not be done at the same time?
Wyeth, go ahead, and if you can't, you can turn it to Zach or Trent Curry.
Yeah, Councilmember Ewald, Mayor and Council. Yeah, I will let them weigh in. I had a conversation some more with Trent today about some of the structure cleanups and such on this. So I'll let him give you some more information on that. Thanks.
Trent, can you answer Councilmember Ewald's question?
Yes, and so the permitting process between commercial and residential demolitions varies. So in residential, it's non-regulated by the city of Billings, but in commercial demolition, it is. So if you're doing a commercial demolition, it requires a phase one and a much more, it's a much larger scale of oversight in the demolition process, requiring, you know, kind of unknown costs until that phase one is done. And it could, you know, you never know what you're going to uncover. It kind of expands the scope significantly. And that's why we broke up into two different phases. Was we could do the residential process on this, which is much more rapid, and at least it seemed at the time, much more rapid on getting the demolition approved through the building department and getting the building demolition started.
Okay, then thank you. Again, the answer is it was cheaper and less risky to do it in two pieces, I guess is their answer. Councilmember Ewald?
Could I have a follow-up, Mayor?
Sure.
When I asked this question of Wyatt last year, he said that that wasn't so, that they could do all four at the same time. And if we do have something that says you can't take four houses down that are in that close proximity without turning it into a commercial, I think we need to look at that policy, because why should we throwing money away to mow bin a second time just to please a policy? You still only got four residential houses.
Wyeth, I don't know if you want to comment, but I guess
That's for Wyeth.
Yeah, Wyeth.
I'll have to follow up with you. I can't comment on what the conversation was last year. And I guess I also have concern about the assumption that automatically by doing two processes that somehow that means it's all more expensive and changes things. Well, I'll have to look at that. So that's all I can contribute right now. Thanks.
Okay. Councilmember, we should move on, but if you got something real quick related to this.
I want to know from Wyatt if it does, because you're doing four houses, if it does take it into commercial or if it's still considered residential.
Yeah, and I'll have to, Councilmember Ewald, Mayor and Council, I'll have to follow up with you. I'm not, from what my conversation with the way Trent was describing the abatement and his, you know, the requirements for the phase one and those sorts of things, I'm going to have to check on that because I'm not clear on that from the issue of building the permit for the demolition and the sign-offs that requires versus also state DEQ and those other requirements. So I'll have to check into that.
Okay, I don't know that we're going to get to the answer to this perfectly. We don't want to kick this dog too long, but Trent Curry had his hand up. Trent, if you had a quick input on this, go ahead and you can have a last word.
Yeah, just to follow up on that question, you know, that's just simply the instructions from the building department when I went to ask them about the best process for obtaining a permit for this project. We had two paths, and one was the commercial, doing all four at one time, or breaking it up into phases.
Okay, thank you very much. That's what you're called, or we're told, but Wyeth, maybe you can look into that because Councilmember Ewald obviously has a good point. I'd recognize Councilmember Joy and then Shaw and then Brown. Councilmember Joy.
Yes, I move to approve the tax increment financing assistance from eBird to Trent Curry for demolition of two residences for future redevelopment as recommended by eBird.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second by Councilmember Shaw. Councilmember Shaw, was that the purpose of your hand? Have we accomplished it?
Yes, I was also going to make a motion. So
okay, thank you. Then we will move on. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. What is we've done other demolition projects and things like that, utilizing some TIF funds. What was the breakout there? Wasn't it roughly 50-50 as well? I mean, it definitely was for Trent last year, but even beyond that.
Councilmember Brown and Mayor and Council, yeah, we've talked about the one specifically here. I'd have to look. The other one that I can check into would be that was fairly recent, I think, was in the eBird for a residential structure next to the Boys and Girls Club. And I know there was a request for funds. Now that's a nonprofit that requested that, so different in that respect, but I can check and see on that one what the total breakdown was there. That's the one that comes to mind that was fairly recent, but we've had a few others as well.
Okay, and just a comment, Mayor.
Sure.
I mean, it wasn't very long ago. I'm thinking 4, maybe 5 years ago, the city actually contemplated paying all dump fees for demolition. We didn't actually do that, but that was a consideration because of the fact that we've got so many buildings that just need to be torn down, and the cost is prohibitive. And they're doing this so that the land then is sellable, so there's no direct recovery cost for this demolition. So we've all identified that that's a big deal to clean up these dilapidated, dangerous buildings. And this is a way to do it. It's not costing the city court fees. It's not costing all of the code enforcement. It's not costing all of that stuff. These guys are voluntarily doing it, and they're just asking us to split the cost with them. And I absolutely support that. We're not infringing on people's property rights or anything else. And this has always been a priority for several years now. So, if we can get rid of these old dumpy buildings, I'm all for it.
Thank you very much. Further discussion, Councilmember Ronning.
Thank you. I agree 100% with what Sean just said. And this was part of the discussion we had the last time that we were talking about this demolition. And we've just had a conversation about public safety, and we've been addressing public safety now for a while. We also have many conversations about the need for public-private partnerships when it comes to development, and how we need to look toward the private sector when it comes to development. And here is a classic example of how we can capitalize on all of those issues, addressing a public safety issue, addressing public-private partnerships when it comes to development, and addressing the opportunity for private development coming into a blighted area and taking care of what clearly has become a public safety issue, but also the willingness of this private developer to build up a blighted area. And so I agree 100% with what Sean said. This is just a classic example of that. So I fully support this.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion, Councilmember Neese.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree. This is a good way to get rid of blight if it has to. In fact, last year, I think I know I voted against it, and I'm changing my opinion on that. I think that we need to get rid of the blight, and I support the idea of moving. I just am really, I guess I'm really concerned about the amount of money we're just giving away on these without knowing. It sounds to me like in the past, we've done 50% before, but we don't have any documentation showing that that's what we do, or nothing in policy says if we're doing demolition, we can do up to 50%. Now, something I would, if you don't mind, Mayor, I would like to ask Zach this real quick. In his estimation on his sheet that he gave us, there was, he said for demolition, they estimated 60%. For backfill, they did 20%. Permits, 50%. So obviously, the eBird has some kind of policy in place that they do a certain percentage for certain types of construction. And maybe we need to take note of what they're doing and bring that into our policy. So I don't know, Zach, is that something you're familiar with on how those numbers are calculated and how you stick to those percentages?
So I'll be honest, the question, I guess the answer I have for that is I work directly with, we literally had this, I think, in my first week, and I was working with Tim Goodrich on this, and it was fairly reflective of a decision that was made on the first contract from the review committee. So I'd have to go back specifically, because we have 6 members on the review committee, 7 with Tim on there now, to ask them how the percentages were brought up, because we literally, because it was the same developer, same project, Tim and I sat down and he said, well, this was pretty well received last time. These are the percentages that we use. I will say that the review committee have pulled for the eBird board in making those decisions. They have kind of pulled things from the code and prioritized those, very much leaning towards the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, towards public projects. But specific 60, 20, 50%, I'd probably have to go back to the board and just ask, where those, or the review committee, I could pull that as well and ask where those came from.
Okay.
We do not have anything in writing.
Okay, thank you. I think we need to get rid of this. And I guess I would make a substitute motion to do up to 25% of the low bid on this instead of the full 52%.
Okay, the substitute motion is for approval with a cap of 25% of a low third-party bid. I'm assuming it would be done. Let me just ask a question before we look for a second. Trent Curry, is the expectation this will be done by a third party where there will be bids as opposed to you doing it with your own shovel?
No, when we are submitting these TIF applications, we're required to submit it with 3 competing bids so that we can have, evidence of cost for any given project. And so I believe Councilman Neese is referring to the lowest of those 3 competing bids.
Correct.
Where the submission with the TIF is, we do the blended average of the 3 bids, and that's how we come to our number that we submit to the TIF.
Okay, the motion again is puts a cap of 25% of the lowest of those 3 bids. Is there a second for the motion? Second by Councilmember Ewalds. The discussion is now on the substitute motion, which, just as a reminder, if this were to pass, it eliminates the underlying motion. If it fails, then we'll come back to the underlying motion. Discussion on the substitute motion, Councilmember Shaw.
Thank you. I don't need to beat a dead horse, so I'll just say what the mayor said earlier and what Sean Brown said and what Penny said before, I 100% agree with. I will not be supporting the substitute motion. Thanks.
Further discussion on the substitute motion, Councilmember Tariki.
I think we've discussed it already in various different ways, so I'd like to call the question.
Okay, we'll now proceed to vote on whether to vote. It requires 2/3 approval. All in favor of proceeding to a vote on the substitute motion, raise your hand. Voting in favor of the question is council members. Well, actually, it's unanimous. So with the exception of Councilmember Yakovich, I apologize. Everybody, Councilmember Yakovich, are you in opposition to the motion? Yes. Okay, so the motion passes 10-1. We'll now proceed to the vote on the substitute motion. All in favor of the substitute motion, which includes that 25% cap based on the low bid, please raise your hand. In favor of the motion. In favor of Councilmember Neese's motion, voting in favor are Councilmembers Ewald and Councilmembers Neese. If in opposition, please raise your hand. Voting in opposition, Councilmembers Boyette, Cole, Tariki, Shaw, Yakovich, Brown, Joy, Ronning, and Purington. So the motion fails. Brings us back to the underlying motion of Councilmember Joy for approval, seconded by Councilmember Shaw, consistent with the staff recommendation. Further discussion on the underlying motion. Councilmember Purington.
I think that we spoke last time regarding, I do believe, what the term of blight is, and I think Sean had said, I think we need to look at some of our policies. And Zach, what you said about in the eBird, how they're tiered, and I would like to see that, and I would like to see that we do move forward with some consistency among the TIF districts of how these applications are presented. And I just think we need more complete information sometimes. I'll go ahead and vote for this. And I always kind of regret sometimes when I do, because I feel like I'm just, going, kind of rolling over on this and not taking into account some of the things that I think are lacking. But I know that the eBird has done some really good things in the area, and I would encourage them to continue doing that. But I think we really need to look at some of these policies.
Thank you very much. Further discussion on the underlying motion. Councilmember Bernice.
The motion, I'm assuming it'll probably pass, but if it, will the staff consider looking at some of these policies that the eBird have in place to try to bring back policy? Or do we need to, maybe this is Chief Chris, do we need to bring an initiative forward to have the TIF policy reviewed?
Maybe Chris Kukulski and or Wyeth can comment on that. I support development of better criteria, if only so we don't have to spend half an hour, 45-minute discussion on whether to spend, in this case, is an extra $10,000 or something like that, and to give greater clarity to developers and consistency across the different TIF districts. They don't have to be exact black and white rules, but at least a better understanding of the criteria. I really like the eBird's 12 criteria and appreciate that they've worked hard to develop those. Chris or Wyeth, can you address where we might be in revisiting some of our TIF policies?
Mayor and Council, I would say certainly, I think what would be most helpful is if maybe a subcommittee of the council in partnership with the TIF boards kind of figures out the gist of the direction they want to go. And frankly, I think I'd limit the staff work that needs to be done there as we're trying to get some other priorities done, while you guys iron out what philosophically do you want to have happen. I'm not suggesting we wouldn't be involved, because we need to be, but maybe we really get to the bottom of what direction does the council want to go, reviewing the policy you adopted, I think in 17 or 18, seeing what needs to be refined about that, what you want changed about that before the staff, does a lot of research and background on it. So I think yes, we're taking a lot of time on Monday nights. Maybe more importantly, we're confusing a lot of people out in our community on the kind of economic development and investment side of the equation, that they don't know. It's very unpredictable what's going to happen when they get to the council. So for those two reasons, we do need to get into this. I'm just trying to think out loud a way to do it that doesn't take a lot of staff resources at the front end while we're working on the overall recode, which is also critically important to economic development. But you guys really hashing out what policy, where do you want TIF money to be spent? Only on public infrastructure, mostly on demo or whatnot. So.
Okay, thank you very much. And one question, Wyeth, can we just kick this to the 3 districts and ask them to come back to us? Wyeth.
Yeah, if I could just add to what Chris is saying, I guess, and maybe this is a first step. There's been, and it's clearly isn't getting conveyed well, but there's been a lot of work with all 3 districts to try to make improvements to the applications, the consistency of those. When there was reference earlier to what the eBird had some criteria from their master plan and what they want to see the South Billings district actually also does. They had that in the last recommendation they brought to you. So I'm wondering if the first step is just to try to get that information to you and show you what we've got and where we're trying to go. Downtown also is working extremely hard on modifying their applications, trying to make it clear when we have applications that are from nonprofits versus applications for profit. And these are actually things that have nothing to do with the 5-to-1. This has to do with just presentation and how this stuff is mechanically put together. So I guess I would ask that maybe we start there. We try to figure out a way to share those things with you and show you kind of where the 3 districts are trying to go and trying to be consistent. And then maybe we can, that's sort of one piece, and then the policy piece might come out of that a little bit, because we have master plans in each district that are being looked at when these come forward. We have the application forms themselves that have been modified, and downtown is just starting to use their new one. So that's what I would say first, because I feel like there's a disconnect about the amount of effort that's out there from the districts and coordinating with staff to do this and what you're seeing. So.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Brown.
Yeah, I just request we get back on track, Your Honor.
Yep, so we have the underlying motion. Councilmember Nice, you could bring initiative, but it sounds like there is work in progress, and if we keep up with staff, we'll see something coming back with us. We'll proceed to a vote on the underlying motion if there's no further discussion on the motion. If not, the motion was for approval, consistent with the staff recommendation. All in favor of the motion, please raise your hand. Voting in favor, council members Boyette, Cole, Tariki, Shaw, Yakowicz, Brown, Joy, Ronning, Parrington, and Ewalt and Nice. So the motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much, Mr. Curry, Zach. Good luck, and it'll be nice to see that gone. Appreciate your efforts there. Okay, that concludes then item number 4. Before we break for an executive session, we have public comment on non-agenda items. So call that number 237-6196. If you'd like to comment on anything that was not on our agenda tonight, you'll have 3 minutes. We'll need your name and address. And as I've said before, please turn off your television or computer because the actual meeting is slightly ahead of what you're hearing and it will confuse you. So please call that number if you would like to comment on anything not on our agenda tonight, 237-6196. Again, you'll have 3 minutes. We'll look to our clerk, Tony. Do we have anybody calling in?
I have not received any calls.
Okay, we'll give it just a few seconds, and let us know if you see somebody calling in. But sounds like we've given an adequate time for people to get caught up here. So we will close the public comment on non-agenda items and move on to council initiatives and then adjournment and then executive session. Are there any council initiatives? Council, I saw Councilmember Nice and Councilmember Treaty. Councilmember Nice.
Thank you, Mayor. Last year during the budget process, I brought up the issue about the policy that was done in, I believe, in the early 80s, maybe 90s, about the use of public space where they charged $1 a square is the last time that was updated. I was asked at that time if I should bring an initiative. The staff said, no, we'll make sure we review it and bring it back to the council before the budget time next year. I got an email from Wyeth during the conversations regarding some of this temporary order down that they're doing with the bars and casinos. He said that they're not going to bring it this year. So I will be bringing an initiative if it's not in the budget this year, where they bring into us some market review of what that should be instead of $1 a square. So I just wanted everyone to know that that will be coming if it's not in the budget. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Councilmember Nice. If you try to use the city initiative form for the rest of us, that would be helpful.
I will do that. I've used it before. It worked out well.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Treaky.
I wanted to, thank you, Mr. Mayor, Council. I wanted to just make a couple of comments because of all of the emails that we've been getting today over the whole issue of funding police, funding social services, and whatnot. It has not been lost on the administration here in the city of Billings, nor on the city council, that public safety is simply about putting more and more police on the streets. There have been a number of things that we have been working on, which unfortunately we're not able to move forward this year because we did not put together a complete public safety mill levy proposal, which Councilmember Shaw very rightfully has been saying over and over again, we need to put that complete plan forward. So I just want people to hear that, that we are working on a number of different things and looking at, including in the budget, a number of different things. One is a Billings version of the Cahoots program, which would basically put a social worker and an EMT into a vehicle and allow them to respond to situations where the police have been called out, but it is much more of like a social work type of situation, like a domestic violence or a person who has a mental a mental health issue and things like that. So that is one definite area that we're looking at moving in. Another one that has been proposed and that we've talked about is putting together domestic violence courts, which will allow.
I think what we're about to hear about is this isn't an initiative, but is that your point, Councilmember Dees?
Yes, I don't hear him actually going to be presenting an initiative. It's more about ideas that he has or what he has for the city council.
Actually, these are, then I will put it down as an initiative, if you want me to say it that way, that these things be included in next year's budget.
Okay, how about just wrapping it up quickly? I think your point's a good one. It's so topical. We are getting a lot of these emails. You're just providing a bit of a public service. So I'm going to allow it, but let's just try to wrap it up so we'll move on to our executive session.
Yep.
Anything else?
And actually, there was only one other thing that I was going to bring up, and that was, and it actually was also partially a question. Is the money that the continuum of care asked for, is that in the budget for this year?
So, Councilman Cheriki, not the original 50,000. I think we added 25 to it in the current year, so we had a total of 75. And Annie's going to tell me one of those two is in it. They're not both in it. I believe 25 is in, which is what we'd contributed for many years towards our downtown efforts in this regard, not 75, which we currently have in this year. And those funds were never, unfortunately, appropriated. I mean, they were not utilized. They were budgeted for, and they were ready as we got into COVID-19, just as we were starting to roll out the implementation of all of the work that our coalition partners were doing. So 25 in next year's, not 75. The current 75 didn't get utilized, so it didn't get, I mean, it'll be added to the reserve and could be appropriated in the future.
Okay, why don't we move on? Because it technically is not an initiative. It's certainly an important topic. We can come back to it maybe next week at a work session or if needed. But okay, anything else? Any other council initiatives before we adjourn? And here, Chris, could you just remind us, for purposes of our executive session, council members should stay on and not make any changes. We don't get off and get back on. Is that correct?
Tony, can you just confirm that for us? I believe we stay on. She can see anybody who's checked in.
Okay.
Yeah, just stay where you are and I will close the meeting to the public.
Okay, so if there's nothing further, we are adjourned. And again, council members should remain on the line. Thank you, everyone.